Bucky asked. What happened 6 years ago? Doyle replied. On this island. I'm afraid few people know about it. Jas took a puff on his cigar. It's Wayland's rebellion. That's right, it was that rebellion. Since then, blocking the Great Vortex has become a dead end. Countless pirates have rushed forward like moths to a flame, but none of the pirates have been able to pass through this route. So far the only way is to change the course of navigation according to the permanent pointer. Dahl paused, then looked at Bucky with a smile. Boss Bucky, do you know why that treasure map hunter stayed near this island? Bucky asked in bewilderment. Why? It is precisely because countless pirates died in this sea that there are shipwrecks everywhere in this sea area. Other pirates disdain or cannot salvage them, but for treasure map hunters, they can collect treasures on the shipwrecks. I found a useful treasure map, especially the base of thousands of wrecks. I have been in contact with this Hildu before, and of course I inevitably robbed his ship, and the Imperial ritual letter as I got it at that time, and after looking through the Imperial letter, I realized that his golden false eye is a key that can open the air springboard. Bucky's face became serious, and he turned to Kabaji and said, Kabaji, go and bring Hildu out. Doyle raised his hand to stop it. No need, I don't think he has seen the royal letter, and he didn't know that the golden pupil in his eyes was actually a unique key, otherwise he wouldn't have exposed it so carelessly. Swaggering through the market. What's going on with this golden pupil? Doyle, you should make it clear at once. As soon as Bucky spoke, Tinker and Jas inevitably tensed up and listened attentively. Of course, I'll make it all clear. Doyle smiled. 6 years ago, it was King Vasulu who ruled the island of Velen. He was afraid of the continuous arrival of pirates, so he was willing to take the initiative to use the air springboard, to send all the pirates away without deliberately making things difficult. Until 6 years ago, there was a rebellion in Wylan Kingdom that rewrote history. The largest chamber of commerce in the Kingdom of Wylan, the Sheila Chamber of Commerce, organized the big riots that Wylan participated in all over the country. You must know that once a businessman reaches the top, he may yearn for huge power. However, the real fuse of this riot was King Vasulu's exorbitant taxation on merchants. The ever-increasing tax rate finally touched the bottom line of the Sheila Chamber of Commerce. Therefore, the Sheila Chamber of Commerce hired a man named Jerma 66 feet with a lot of money. The organization, in just 3 hours, completely defeated the kingdom army and assisted the leader of the Sheila Chamber of Commerce to win the rebellion. King Vasulu fled to the sea and took away the key that hides the secrets of the entire country. Golden Pupil. Since then, until now 6 years later, no pirate has been able to pass through this large vortex. I think that King Vasulu probably died on this sea, so Hildu received the Golden Pupil and the royal letter by luck. Jas and Tinker didn't speak for a while, and even Bucky pondered for a moment before asking. If the Golden Pupil you proposed is the key to open the so-called air springboard, then this key should be released just now. The king's intermediary should be taken back, so if that's the case, as long as we go to negotiate with the king and ask him to borrow the air springboard, to cut off the big eddy current, isn't it all right? It's actually not that simple. Doyle glanced at Jas and Tinker. These two leaders should understand. Jas, with a cigar in his mouth, just watched indifferently, and did not answer, while Tinker also sat on the single sofa with a blank expression. In that case, let me tell you what I saw in the past few days. Seeing that the two did not answer, Doyle said slowly. First of all, this treasure map hunter has been wandering in this sea area for so many years, but his golden pupil was taken away today. I think the current King Shi Luo of Wei Lan just discovered that the golden pupil he had been looking for a long time was actually taken away. A treasure map hunter wears it squarely in the eye. However, it is probably because the king of Sheila started his business as a businessman. His methods are much better than that of the previous King Vasulu. Instead, the barrier of Little Shampoo is set up. Most of the pirates who want to go to Wylan will first enter Little Shampoo, and once they land on the island, these pirates will be attracted by the word of mouth on this island. Remember, as long as the comprehensive strength is judged and recognized by the king's intermediary, you can gain wealth, power and even legal plunder. This high-hanging rule plaque is like the feces that attract countless flies and attracts countless pirates. Hearing this, Jas snorted dissatisfiedly, and Doyle smiled. Sorry. Maybe my description is inappropriate, but the large vortex that cuts off the progress of all pirates. In this case, this barrier however, it effectively solved the crisis of Wei Lan's hoarding pirates, using this small shamboured island to create an endless arena, allowing all pirates to fight each other in exchange for power and wealth. Reducing the number of pirates and differentiation forms a hierarchy, which is the real purpose of the King Sheila. He only needs to spend limited resources to intercept the endless pirate swarms. I know. Tinker finally said. Kisu, the broker of the kingdom, tried to invite me to join this kingdom of Sheila. HMPH. Jas snorted coldly, and glanced at Tinker. So, I invited you too. Doyle continued, I think. This King Sheila will not let you leave here through the air springboard. After all, if you continue to stay on this island, you can actually save him a lot of trouble. Even if, Sky Springboard, reactivated, he will also destroy or hide its existence, which is why I want everyone to work together. Doyle glanced at Jas, then at Tinker. Whether it's the leader of Jas or the leader of Tinker, they are all arrogant people, and they probably don't want to be trapped in a small shampoo field, right? Jas put down the cigar in his mouth. Of course I'm not that group of superficial trash on the island. If there is a permanent pointer to leave this island, I will choose to leave here, Tinker said coldly. Doyle looked at Bucky. So what about Chief Bucky? Bucky turned his head slightly to look at Doyle, and asked, what do you want to do? Doyle said with a smile, I don't think everyone is willing to obey anyone's command, so I don't have any detailed plan, so I will take the simplest and rude way of action. The four of us will divide into 4 directions to hide the air springboard. The king's treasury is moving towards a common goal. At that time, we will act together to force Sheila to hand over the air springboard. With our combined strength, even the strength of a country is nothing. However, plans are never as good as changes. We still need to communicate in time and assist each other. What do you think? Jas said in a low voice. This is the best. No one wants to order me. Tinker glanced at everyone indifferently, and pulled down the black cloak to cover his eyes as dark as night. That's it. A smile was drawn on the corner of Bucky's mouth. I have no objection. Doyle said with a smile. As the host, Chief Bucky, please send someone to bring the protocol wine. Bucky felt that Doyle's words were very constructive, so he nodded. Shuma, bring a jug of wine and a glass. Come on, Bucky yelled, and Huma quickly came out of the cabin with a wine jug and wine glasses. Bucky picked up 4 wine bowls and put them on the deck, uncorked the wine jugs, and filled them up one by one. After everyone had picked up the wine bowls, he picked up the last remaining bowl and held it high in the air. Dong Hai wine, please. In the world of One Piece, there is also a unique pirate culture. Friends can have promiscuous sex, but alcohol cannot be drunk. For example, the wine of Righteous Sons. When one pirate group joins the other pirate group, both parties will drink Righteous Son of wine. The same is true for the wine of agreement. Once drunk, it means that an agreement has been reached and must not be abandoned. Bucky, Doyle, Tinker, and Jas collided with each other with bowls full of wine, made a joint oath, then raised their heads and took a sip, the spicy wine, gurgling, down their mouths. The ground dripped into the throat and flowed into the stomach. Wait. Why is this wine so spicy? Bucky felt his mouth was dry, and there was an indescribable scalding in his throat. He looked at Shuma with sweat dripping down his face. There must be more pepper in it. Shuma didn't show any introspection, rubbed his fingers under his nose, and grinned a very bright smile. Even Bucky, who has been accustomed to adding chili peppers to his dishes all year round, can't bear the heavy spicy taste at this moment, and he has even mentioned to Tinker, Jas, and Doyle. Doyle was choked and started to cough nonstop. His complexion was fairer, but at this moment he looked as red as a monkey's buttocks. Jas originally wanted to drink it all in one go to prove his arrogance and sophisticated, but after a few sips, he really couldn't stand such a spicy wine, so he had to take out a cigar, trying to use the taste of the cigar to cover the spicy taste that was difficult to enter his throat. And Tin K was so hot that he directly took off the black cloak that he had never taken off, revealing a young baby face full of hot sweat and a clean spiky hair. After taking a sip of wine, he took a breath, and then continued to drink. The protocol wine must be finished after taking a sip, otherwise it is considered inferior in the agreement and cannot hold its head up, so several people want to hold on to drink this bowl of wine. But in fact one is more embarrassing and uncomfortable than the other, but luckily there are people guarding the shore. Otherwise if the group of pirates below see this appearance, I am afraid that the overlords of them will have no face to go out to meet people. After drinking a bowl of wine for 5 minutes, Jas wiped the wine stains from the corners of his mouth, placed the bowl heavily on the deck, and looked at Bucky through gritted teeth. Bucky the clown. The wine in the East China Sea is really delicious. Delicious. Is it delicious? He. Shuma couldn't hear it. He stood aside and picked up the jug and the empty bowl that Jas had put down, and was about to pour another bowl. Seeing this, Jas quickly snatched the empty bowl, held it in his arms in a distraught manner, and looked at Shuma vigilantly. What do you want to do, cook? Hey, didn't you say it's delicious? Shuma scratched his head, and then looked at Tinker and Doyle who had just put down the wine bowl with hot sweat on their foreheads. The corners of the mouths of the two twitched, and at the same time, they pushed the empty bowl to the back where Shuma couldn't reach. No. Okay, Shuma. Looking at the embarrassing faces of the crowd, Bucky smoothed things over. You go and get some food. Oh, wait a minute. Shuma briskly walked into the cabin. The hotness in everyone's stomach made them too unwilling to speak at this time. In the inexplicable silence, a seabird in the sky fluttered its wings and jumped from the deck. Flyby. Tinker, who was feeling sick, glanced out of the corner of his eye, and a black spot appeared on the palm of his hand. Suddenly, the palm turned upwards, condensed into a beam of tiny black light in the air, and shot out, hitting the suffering seabird as if venting. The seabird suffered from this blow, its wings became very heavy, and its waving speed became very slow. It suddenly fell on the deck, and a pile of newspapers on its body was scattered on the deck. This is a newsbird. Bucky frowned. Tink, what are you doing? Newsbirds pass messages back and forth all over the world and will never be targeted and hunted, because once one of them is hunted, the rest of the newsbirds will not come close, so the hunter will not only lose the extremely important real-time information, but also will be blacklisted. I didn't hurt it. Tinker spoke indifferently, but because of the choking on the chili pepper, he kept sniffing his nose, combined with his immature baby face. He looked like a kid who had just been wronged and cried. The big pirate's indifference, probably because he wears a black cloak all year round to pretend to be tough, to cover up this delicate and immature face. Hearing what Tink said, Bucky turned his head to look at the newsbird. The newsbird shrugged its head, and its whole body was limp on the deck, but there were no wounds or blood on its body, and it just looked extremely tired. The power of fatigue and sleepiness. Bucky remembered what Hildu said, and secretly paid attention to Tink's devil fruit ability in his heart. When Bucky focused on the newsbird, Jas, Tinker and Doyle all involuntarily looked at a bounty list on the deck and the astonishing bounty amount above it. Bucky the Clown reward amount, 136 million live or die. 136 million. Tinker muttered in his heart, forgetting the original purpose of shooting down the newsbird. There was a flash of shock in Jas' eyes, and he raised his head solemnly to compare with Bucky's appearance, and sure enough. I still underestimated this guy, the reward can reach such a high amount. Doyle was silent, and the usual smile on his face disappeared immediately. While several people were silent, Shu Ma had brought out several plates of food and walked towards this side. I still have something to do, so I won't be staying soon. Jas came back to his senses and looked at the food brought by Shu Ma. His expression became unnatural, and he ordered his subordinates to leave a note with the phone number, got up and left. Farewell. Tinker indifferently put on the black cloak again, covered his face in the shadow, and stood up like a snake to avoid Shuma. The single sofa behind him turned into countless black spots as he got up, and finally disappeared into the air. The two left with their men, one after the other. Boss Bucky. Doyle looked away from the reward list on the deck, took out a bamboo tube from his body, and handed it over. There is a map of Wei Lan in it. From this small Chambord land it will take half a day to set off to Weilan, and another half day to reach the Kingdom Castle in the center of the island, and we will meet again in about a day. Bucky took the bamboo tube and waited until Doyle left before he realized it. He looked at the newsbird on the deck with black lines on his face, and slowly picked up the newspapers and papers that were scattered everywhere on the deck by that bastard Tinker. The bounty list contained in it. When he picked it up, his attention was focused on the several bounty lists in his hand. In addition to his own bounty of 136 million, there are also bounties from Kabaji and others. Cheat Knife Kabaji, a reward of 64 million is offered, regardless of life or death. Lion Heart Mochi, a bounty of 56 million is offered, regardless of life or death. Wind Bird Repair Horse, a bounty of 60 million is offered, regardless of life or death. Thundercat Mickle, a bounty of 12 million is offered, regardless of life or death. Ship Dr. Kia, a bounty of 3 million is offered, regardless of life or death. Useless Lion Niche, a reward of 5 Baileys is offered, regardless of life or death. Have all the members been offered rewards? Bucky looked at the newspaper with great interest, and he didn't expect his bounty to rise so much all of a sudden, which was really unexpected. Not only that, the total amount of rewards offered by all the pirates is as high as 300 million Baileys. The determination of the bounty is not only based on personal combat effectiveness and danger, but also means the importance of the Navy and a combination of various factors, such as breaking through the flag of the world government in full view, or making a massacre of a small town, bad deeds, and knowledge of ancient characters. Compared with the previous bounties, today's bounty is simply a heaven and an earth. Why did the Navy suddenly raise a reward of nearly 136 million for itself? Even if he defeated the big pirate one-eyed from the original New World, I'm afraid it would not be possible to increase it by so much. In other words, his identity as a trainee crew member on the ship of One Piece Roger is very likely to be pursued by the Navy, so there is such a high bounty. But is it really that simple? Maybe the Navy has a deeper purpose for doing this. Why are they gone? Huma's voice pulled Bucky back from his thoughts, and the latter let out a sigh of relief, helping his forehead helplessly. They are not blessed to enjoy the delicious food you made. Let's eat it by ourselves. Holding the food in his hand, Shu Ma said regretfully, that's such a pity. By the way, Lilina is back? I don't seem to see it. Didn't you come back? Bucky pursed his lips slightly, and when Hildu confided about the island, he noticed a subtle change in Lilina's expression, and when he arrived at Little Chambord, the woman left without hesitation. What are you thinking again? Bucky put his shoulders on Shuma's shoulder and walked towards the cabin. It doesn't matter. Shuma, go and call Kabaji and the others over. Let's have a full meal first. East China Sea, Xiluobu village. On the sunny hillside, Usopp rested his hands on the back of his head, lying on the soft lawn with his whole body, staring at the sky in a daze, with his mouth slightly pouted, balancing the penis hanging on his slender and long nose. Root slingshot. Captain Usopp, Captain Usopp. The three onion heads ran up from the hillside, shouting non-stop, and when the three of them ran to Usopp's side panting, the latter lazily stood up. What's the matter, you guys? Guy. Yes. Yes. It's Miss K Ya's reward list. Usopp immediately cheered up, grabbed the reward list from Onion's hand, and looked at it carefully in front of his eyes. On the reward list is a white dress, with a wreath made of colorful flowers on his forehead, and short light yellow hair flowing down like silk, like a beautiful water lily. This image of her was directly shot from the screen projected by Gallo with a phone bug, and she was completely different from the sick and delicate young lady in Usopp's memory. Kia, there is a reward of 3 million. Usopp stared at the reward list and murmured absent-mindedly. The little guys hesitated for a while, then looked at each other, then slowly took out a reward list, and said to Usopp, Captain Usopp, this is the clown Bucky. The bounty list. Is it the reward list for the red-nosed bastard? Usopp took the reward list in Qingjiaotu's hand with great emotion, looked at the face on the reward list with a faintly visible sly smile, and then looked at the tall man below. The amount of reward on his forehead, cold sweat dripped down his cheeks to the ground. He stretched out a finger, trembling, counting the digits of the reward amount one by one. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. When he counted to the last one, he suddenly gasped for breath, immediately dropped the reward list, his hands tightly around his neck, and rolled on the spot. It's over, I've got a disease that can't read the reward list, I'm about to die. Karatou clenched his fists and said loudly, Captain Usopp, you must find a way to rescue Miss Kia. How can you give up on her? Kaya. Yes. Kaya. Usopp was sweating hotly on his forehead, panting excitedly, picked up Kia's reward list from the ground and held it tightly in his hand. His eyes couldn't help but fall again. Seeing Bucky's bounty list that fell to the ground, he swallowed. He touched the scar on Shang's chest that was hit by Shuma's boomerang and hadn't fully healed. He gritted his teeth, stood up, raised the slingshot in his hand, and shouted loudly towards the magnificent sea in the distance. I will not lose to you, Bucky the Clown. I must become a brave sea warrior and take Kia back from your hands. Kia. You must wait for me. The three little guys shouted in unison in admiration. So handsome, as expected of our Captain Usopp. With trembling legs, Usopp picked up Bucky's bounty list on the ground. Take this as a target today, I will practice shooting 1,000 times. Oh. East China Sea, Coco West Village. Nuoki Gao. The door of the white hut beside the orange grove was pushed open, and Nami, who was carrying a bag of gold and silver treasures, put the bag on her shoulders in disgrace, and let out a long sigh of relief. Nami, Kikiashi village has been liberated, we no longer need to collect treasures. Nuo Kagao shook his head helplessly, why do you still go to such a dangerous thing? Hee. Nami stuck out her tongue playfully, I am not for the village, but for myself. A woman who loves beauty wants to buy a lot of beautiful clothes, skirts and gorgeous shoes. If I have no income, I'm going to become a village woman with rough skin like you who doesn't know how to dress up. Yes. Nuo Kagao has become accustomed to making fun of Nami. Since Aaron's death, the village has no longer been full of depression and sadness. Nami's mood has become more and more cheerful, and her words have become more and more. It was like returning to the time when Burma was there. Here, let me show you something. Nuo Kagao took a reward list from the table. A bounty list? Is it a pirate full of treasures on a ship? You'll know just by looking at it. Nami suspiciously took the reward list from Master Nuoki, and froze on the spot. It's the kiddies. Reward list, 12 million Baileys. Nuo Kagao leaned against the doorframe, folded her arms across her chest, and said with a knowing smile. I was shocked when I saw this reward list just now. This restless little cat has also been offered a reward of more than 10 million. Won, probably stronger than most of the pirates in the East China Sea. It's amazing. Nami had a surprised expression on her face. If I have a chance to see her in the future, I must ask her what she did to get such a high bounty. Let's take a look at this one again. Nuo Kagao handed over another bounty slip. Nami accepted the bounty slip with mental preparation this time. Looking at the reward list in front of him, he stammered. Wait. 136 million. This is the reward list of that clown Bucky. He is even higher than Aaron's 6 times more. In Nami's heart, Aaron's bounty is the highest among all the pirates she has ever seen, and it has always been a peak that cannot be climbed, but the facts now tell her. The mountain you look up to is just someone else's. A small pile of sand underfoot. This kind of shock is unimaginable, especially the clown Bucky who offered a reward of over 136 million once stood in front of her alive and tried to invite her to board the boat. Nami's mood at this time could not be calm for a long time, until Nuoki Gao Anran's leisurely words brought her back to reality. Nami, do you still hate pirates? Nami slowly put down the reward list in her hand, looked at Nuo Kagao with flickering eyes, and then looked up into the distance. It is the pirate who brought us to hell, but it is also the pirate who brought us back to the world. I think it's just like what Bucky said. It's ridiculously wrong to deny all people based on some people alone. Whether it's pirates or navy, I will use my own eyes to judge whether it is good or evil. You have become stronger, Nami. Nuo Kagao showed a tolerant smile, raised his hand and pointed his thumb to the inner room. Come on, I've already made orange rice. Nami stretched lazily. It feels so good to be home. East China Sea Restaurant Baladi. The sea restaurant is still as lively as before, and there is an endless stream of guests who come to taste the food. Paddy stood in front of a table and squeezed out a very ugly smile to the guests in front of him. Masters, this position but the clown Bucky, who has a reward of over 100 million, sat in the seat before, and he has to pay a tip of 1,000 Baileys for this seat. Paddy, don't play such silly little tricks. Sanji held the dinner plate and ruthlessly tore off the new bounties posted on the wall, spitting out a puff of smoke rings. Cook honestly for me. HMPH. Paddy rolled up his sleeves in displeasure, and reluctantly walked towards the restaurant. Why does the boss want you, a brat, to be the sous chef? Sanji put all the food on the plate on a table where guests were sitting, then walked to the deck with the bounty list, leaned against the railing, looked at the bounty list in his hand. This idiot's the reward is really not low. There are 60 million Baileys, and this clown Bucky, I don't know how much the old man's reward was. Are you talking bad about me again, brat? Jeppu jumped onto the deck from the window on the second floor, and hit Sanji's head hard with his chef's hat, which was nearly 1 meter high. The ears are really flexible. I really don't know how long it will take for you to be too old to hear anything. HMPH, unless you, brat, are far enough away from me, don't be lucky enough to think that you can speak behind your back without being heard by the old man. Don't think about it. Unless you die, I will keep talking bad things around you. Sanji. Jeppu suddenly called Sanji's name this time instead of Stinky Boy, partner. Then go to the Great Root, there will definitely be blue seas there. Sanji muttered. This time surprisingly he did not refute, but exhaled a long puff of smoke rings, and walked silently into the dining room with the reward list in his hand. Underground of Rainland Casino, Alabasta. Robin with a healthy wheat complexion rarely sat on a chair with a serious face, picked up the black tea on the table, took a breath of hot air, and stared intently at the reward list in front of him. Mr. Red Nose, I haven't seen you in a few years. You have become so outstanding. Crocodile in a suit and leather shoes walked down the passageway with a cigar in his mouth, casually glanced at the reward list on the table out of the corner of his eye, then turned around and looked at the banana crocodile in the pool. This whose reward list is it? You, a woman, also care about something? Hee hee. Robin smiled faintly. It's just a very interesting new bounty list. I'm just wondering what a rookie pirate with a bounty of over 100 million looks like. Maybe we can also find a way to let him join Baroque Works. Crocodile had a cigar in his mouth. Oh? Can you contact this guy? Robin said calmly. Sorry, I can't, Mr. Zero. Forget it. We don't need to spend so much effort on this pirate. All I want is that thing hidden in the history of this country. Before we get it, all our energy should be put here. You know what I mean, Nicole Robin. Another boring lecture. Robin stood up, put on his white jazz hat, and walked out. I'll go first. It's such an incomprehensible woman. Crocodile let her go without paying attention, watching the banana crocodile chasing a small sea king in the pool. Swallow it. As long as you plan for a while, the country will be swallowed by endless sandstorms. On the Bakudop, Bucky and others ate the food prepared by Shuma, while looking at the reward list brought by Bucky. Where there are people, there are disputes, among which Kabaji's complacency in front of Moki is indispensable, so the latter gnaws the hot pancake in his hand while angrily pulling hair on Li Chi to vent. Kei Ya's expression was a bit complicated. Although he was a pirate in name, when he actually saw his bounty, he had another strange feeling. Shuma and Mikkel didn't feel much at all. To Shuma, a reward of 60 million is no different from 600 million or 6 million. They don't take it seriously at all. For them, pirates are just a way of life, not an identity. Everyone had a full meal, and finally, they were about to leave Shaoshampod. Don't wait for Lilina. Kia looked at Bucky suspiciously. Over the past few days, everyone's image of Lilina has changed a lot. After all, she is just an immature little girl. The others also looked at Bucky at this time, and there was also the meaning of this question in their eyes. Bucky accepted everyone's gaze, and said with a serious face, "Let me make it clear to you first, there is no relationship between me and her as you imagined. What you saw was just her personal performance, it's just her trick." Bucky finally said what he wanted to say, because Lilina had been making trouble before, so Bucky's words were always unconvincing, and now without Lilina's obstruction, his words listened it suddenly became very reliable again. Everyone looked at me, I looked at you, and finally Kia came forward and said, "Even so, is it really okay to leave her here alone? Here are some pirates doing evil. Her skills are not weak." Seeing that everyone was not entangled in that relationship, Bucky secretly breathed a sigh of relief, and she acted rashly when she disembarked, and she didn't even say hello to us. I think she must have some purpose here. She is now not our companions, and we are under no obligation to be her ships, are we? Kaya was still a little entangled in her heart, but she didn't say anything when she came to her mouth, and the rest of the people were also silent and didn't speak. Okay. Let's go to Wei Lan. Bucky made a final decision, and didn't give them any chance to hesitate and refute. Afterwards, Kabaji and Mochi came to the deck and were responsible for raising the sails and heaving the anchor. They slowly drove the Bickadup away from the port, and moved along the sea 100 meters away from the island of Petit Chambord towards the direction pointed by the magnetic force. A high bounty has the advantage of a high bounty. During the voyage along the way, whenever the pirate ships on the sea saw Bucky's sails, they all took the initiative to retreat. Riding the wind and waves, the Bickadup approached Wei Lan. At this time, Bucky was in the captain's room looking at the panoramic map of Wyland's geography that Doyle had brought over. The area of Wyland's island is not that big, it's almost less than half the size of Santon City, so the entire island has only one super large city, Wyland, and there are 6 small villages around Wyland. Doyle, Tinker, Jas, and Bucky have also discussed before. If they advance together, the goal is too high profile, and it may be counterproductive. Therefore, the best way is to divide the troops into multiple groups, and finally meet at Wei Lan. Jas and Tinker are more familiar with the nearby sea area, so they outflanked Wyland from the northwest and southwest sea routes, while Bucky and Doyle landed in the southeast and northeast, and arrived in Wyland. At the same time, several people also left phone bug numbers with each other before. Once there is an emergency, they can contact in time to understand each other's situation and make the next move conveniently. According to Doyle, as long as the 4 pirate groups unite together, they can directly force King Sheila to open the king's treasury and take out the air springboard by force. The item, air springboard, was destroyed, completely blocking this route. As for what the aerial springboard is, even Doyle can't tell. He only knows that as long as he has this thing, he can even send people to the air with a boat, and pass through the air to cut off the large vortex. After sailing on the sea for 3 hours, Bickadup finally landed from the southeast corner of Wyland. The port is barren and deserted, and the grass is luxuriant. It looks extremely depressed. The Bickadup was docked in the gap formed by the reef in the port, and then several people lowered the anchor and furled the sails. Mochi and Mikkel guarded the ship, and Bucky brought Shuma, Kabaji and others. Ya disembark. Hildu was also taken off the boat by Bucky. He was wearing a black eye patch over his left eye to block the empty eye. His injury was actually not serious, but the hollow feeling in his eye made him I can't cheer up all the time. Hildu, let me ask you, you really don't know what the gold beads are? I don't know. I really like this bead so much, so I carried it with me afterwards. Then how did you get this bead? It was found from the remains of a salvaged ship. I didn't expect this thing to be coveted by others. Bucky asked all the way, but Hildo didn't know anything about it. Even if he knew it, it was nothing important. Stopping and stopping, everyone finally came to a dilapidated village. Just as Bucky stepped into the entrance of the village, he saw a few people running in small steps in front of him. These people were sweating profusely, and their faces looked very tired. In the middle of the crowd is a man wearing a nose ring looking around, and among them there is also a tall but clumsy man who is also very conspicuous. He is carrying a very heavy and large bag in his hand, quickly followed behind the few people in front. Fighting with butterflies along the way, the very self-satisfied Shuma walked around, not looking at the situation ahead, and was about to bump into these people. The man with the nose ring saw someone bumping into him. His face became a little nervous, and he quickly winked at the man in the red turban holding the knife. The man in the red turban put the dagger in his hand on his abdomen, and stabbed at the oncoming repair horse with a disagreement. I saw the butterfly flying upwards, and Shuma's body also jumped upwards with the butterfly, and then took a step in the air, stepped hard on the head of the man with the red turban, jumped up a certain distance, and stretched out. He stretched out 2 index fingers and gently twirled the butterfly flying in the air, stepped on a few heads, jumped all the way as if jumping on a spring bed, and finally stepped on the head of that clumsy tall man before falling to the ground. At the beginning, because of the downward force and forward momentum of the repair horse, the whole face of the man in the red turban was pushed deeply into the mud, and his hands struggled desperately on the ground. The man with the nose ring signaled his subordinates to stop, only to realize that the savage with the leaf necklace seemed to be in the same group as the people in front of him. He took out the dagger at his waist, stuck out his tongue on the blade of the dagger, he licked it from bottom to top, and then said viciously, "Who are you? Don't you want to provoke us? We are all vicious pirates." Bucky narrowed his eyes and looked at the group of people standing in front of him, and finally focused his attention on the bag carried by the tall man. "Pirates are not protected by the law. If you don't want to die, put your body hand over everything." The man with the nose ring was stunned. "I already said we are pirates, you bastard." "What about pirates?" Bucky glanced at the other party casually. The man with the nose ring quickly pulled the tall man to his side, and said sternly, "This Apapa has a reward of 6 million yuan. You bastards who don't want to die, get out of here." Seeing that the boss used him as a front, Apapa threw the bag in his hand casually, like an orangutan, with his hands hanging down his chest, showing his strength. Bucky sneered with disdain, rushed up, and immediately joined the flock like a wolf, but in the blink of an eye, everyone, including the strong Apapa, flew out with a bruised nose and a swollen face, fell to the ground and howled. The man in the red turban who was trampled into the ground by Shuma managed to free his head from the mud. He was about to yell at him, but found that something was wrong. He quickly sank his head into the mud and lay motionless on the ground, quite dead. The bloated bag thrown on the ground by the tall man shook at this moment, and there was a slight whimpering sound inside. "What?" Bucky walked over and untied the hemp rope that was used to seal the bag. Inside the sack was a very fat woman wearing an oversized dress made of luxurious satin. Her body was curled up in the sack, her hands and feet were tightly bound, her mouth was stuffed with sackcloth, and her right cheek was covered with freckles. There is an obvious bruise on it, which should have been injured when it was thrown out by the tall man just now. It's a woman. Bucky originally thought that the bag contained gold and silver treasures, but he didn't expect it to be a woman who looked similar to Alrita. Why did he think of Alrita? Bucky suddenly backed away in a dull manner. Woo. The fat woman was stuffed with sackcloth, whimpering inarticulately, her hands and feet were constantly struggling, and the fat on her body was trembling during the struggle. Kaya hurried forward, tried her best to untie the hemp rope from the obese woman, and whispered, "Run away." The obese woman rubbed her sore wrist, and looked at the situation in front of her with a slight frown. The pirates who kidnapped her had fallen to the ground. It seemed that the man with the red nose in front of her rescued her. "Own. Let's go." Baki said lightly to Kabaji and the others that this kind of human trafficking happens every day on the sea, he can't control it, and he doesn't want to, and is about to leave. Seeing this, the fat woman quickly stretched out her right hand, clasped Bucky's wrist, and said forcefully in an orderly tone, "You guys, kill these pirates quickly and bring me back to Wylan." "Oh." Bucky stopped, and glanced at the fat woman. "Why should I carry your burden?" "Why?" Bucky's words stunned the fat woman, and then she showed anger. "You humble bastard. How dare you disobey my order?" Halfway through her words, she turned into a murmur, and then she could no longer make a sound as if someone had strangled her neck. Her pupils slowly dilated, and the hand holding Bucky's wrist loosened weakly. Those ferocious and cunning eyes exuded a terrifying and deep aura, and she had an intuition that if she continued to speak, she would face real death. This sense of crisis was something she had never felt before. It was as if a biting cold wind was blowing behind her, directly blowing into her head. When she came back to her senses again, Bucky and his party had gradually drifted away, and finally turned into a handful of black spots and disappeared from sight. Gone. She withdrew her unknowingly fascinated gaze, shook her head slightly, and looked at the few pirates around who were able to stand up and smile grinningly at her. "Hey, Princess Kixilu, you'd better submit obediently, and wait for your father to save you with a ransom." After the leading man with the nose ring finished speaking, he was hit hard on the back of the head and completely fainted. A group of armored soldiers who finally arrived quickly surrounded and subdued several pirates amidst their begging for mercy or resistance. Standing out from the crowd, the handsome man in bright silver clothes came out of the team, stretched out a hand to help Mic Lu up, and blamed himself. "This subordinate is not well guarded, please punish the princess." If according to Chi Qianlu's previous temper and personality, she was wronged by being hijacked by pirates, and she and others came late, she would definitely lose her temper and scold herself and others bloody. "Forget it, Helion." Before Chi Qianlu could finish speaking, The handsome man immediately knelt down and clasped his fists. His Royal Highness, please punish us. Us. Helian's eyes widened, he stopped talking intermittently, and raised his head in disbelief to look at Her Royal Highness in front of him. I said, forget it. Qi Qianlu said it again, and then played with her hair shyly like a little girl, with a blush on her face. If it wasn't for this accident, I don't think I would have done it in this life. There will be this feeling of heartbeat. Probably this is the storm called love. Princess. Helian focused his eyes on the little pirates in front of him, with murderous intent in his eyes. These bastards, will you? When these pirates heard Helian's words, they shook their heads with tears streaming down their faces, but their mouths were stuffed with sackcloth, and they couldn't speak a word. Women, even if they are happy, they will admit it, but the other party is a fat man of 200 or 300 caddies, so there is no way for people to have any evil thoughts. This kind of non-existent hat is put on their heads. Even if they die, they will not be reconciled. Hearing Helian's words, Qixilu directly smashed the opponent to the ground with a huge fist, and said angrily, Helian, what nonsense are you talking about? Helian stood up and wiped the dirt off his face, heaved a sigh of relief, cupped his fists and said, this subordinate is talking too much. HMPH. Qixilu snorted coquettishly, it's not them, but that man. As she said that, there was a hint of fascination in her eyes. What a fascinating look. I really want to be looked at by him so affectionately all the time. This is the first time in my life that I have a feeling of heartbeat. The Prince Charming in my life is destined to be him. Helian listened to Qi Qianlu's words, and suddenly suffocated, feeling an unspeakable colic in his heart. He didn't care how fat his childhood sweetheart grew up with, and what his personality would become. Even if the other party's from a commoner to a princess, he has been trying to catch up and become the best princess knight. But now the girl he has been silently guarding told him that he has someone in mind. He felt that his life had become very gloomy, as if being pulled into an endless abyss by an invisible hand. Helian looked at Qi Qianlu with difficulty. Princess, who is he? Qi Qianlu covered her big shy face with her two palms. I don't know who he is, but he has a bright red nose, just like the sun, hot and bright red, which makes people yearn for it. Your Majesty will not let you be with a stranger, princess. Don't worry about it, my father loves me the most. As long as I want anything, he will find a way to get it, even that man. In the quiet of the night, all the way through the desolate, dilapidated, almost uninhabited villages, and then through the dense forest, Buggy and his party came to the hillside overlooking the entire Wyland city. This city is located west of the center of the island, covering a quarter of the island's area. Looking from a distance, the kingdom castle in the center of Wyland city is like a sharp knife piercing the sky in the starry night. Tens of thousands of families in the city brightly lit, like a beautiful picture scroll. The majestic city wall is located on the side close to the western sea area. It is a crescent-shaped semi-enclosed structure, and it was probably built to prevent the endless intrusion of pirates from the sea. This is our destination, Wei-Lan, Captain Buggy. Looking at the bustling scenery below, Kabaji was slightly moved. It's really beautiful here. After all, Kei-Ya was born in a small village in the East China Sea, and she has never seen such a beautiful night. The night scene at this moment has a unique attraction for her. Looking at the splendor of the big city, there will be a feeling of vicissitudes. Even Shuma's mouth was opened into an O shape, with an exaggerated expression on his face. Let's go. Buggy looked at the expressions of several people, shook his head with a smile, and continued walking down the gentle slope, and the people behind followed Buggy's footsteps. When they came to Wyland Street unimpeded, Buggy and others really felt the bustling scene. Even at night, the streets were still full of people coming and going, and the noisy crowd and colorful street lamps made this bustling scene set off more clearly. It's just that a few soldiers shuttled through the crowd, holding a portrait in their hands. The figures in the portraits are very handsome, with a face as sharp as a knife, a pair of eyes shining like stars, and a line drawn at the corner of their mouths. Very charming smile, sea blue hair with a deep and unique atmosphere. The most obvious feature is the round and bright red nose, which has the feeling of a flower fairy surrounded by thousands of flowers, making people unable to move their eyes away. Uncle Buggy, that could be you, right? Kei-Ya covered her mouth and sniggered, thinking that Buggy was drawn so handsomely, she found it amusing and funny. Kabaji whispered, Captain Buggy, are you wanted? Skin smoothing and beautification. Buggy's eyes fell on the portrait, and he murmured silently in his heart. Then he pulled up the cloak behind him with one hand to cover his face, and tightly covered Shuma's mouth with the other hand, for fear that his unintentional move would make him feel ashamed. Give exposure. But what's the situation now, being wanted? Buggy was also not sure what the group of soldiers wanted to do. According to Doyle, wait until the other captains are all present before proceeding to the next step. It is not easy to expose his whereabouts now, otherwise it will cause some troubles. Hey, it's that person. There. Several soldiers pointed, and suddenly walked towards Bucky's direction. Has it been discovered? Bucky narrowed his eyes slightly, looked at the crowd and terrain around him, and began to think about the escape route after he would do something. It's you. These soldiers changed their direction when Bucky was stunned for a moment, and surrounded a circus clown who was performing acrobatics next to him. The circus clown looked at the soldier and stammered, what happened? I'm innocent. I don't know anything. I didn't commit any crime. The captain of the soldier looked seriously at the portrait in his hand, then at the circus clown, and immediately grinned flatteringly and said, My lord. You have been chosen by His Highness the Princess. Maybe you will be there soon. Became the king's son-in-law. I was taken by the princess. The circus clown froze in place, wiped the white powder on his face with his sleeve excitedly, and knocked his red nose off his face to the ground. He burst into tears. He said, Really? It must be that my dead mother didn't want me to work so hard anymore, so she blessed me in the dark. Captain, this red nose. Several soldiers looked at each other. The captain's expression changed, and his voice suddenly became cold. How dare you pretend to be the person Her Royal Highness is looking for? If we see you again next time, I will take you to jail. Get lost. Pretend to be. The tears in the circus clown's eyes stopped abruptly, and he looked at the soldiers in front of him in a daze, feeling like he was on a roller coaster. First he came to heaven, and then he returned to hell. He hurriedly packed up the performance props beside him, and fled the scene scrambling. Looking at the situation in front of him, Bucky winked at several people, then slipped out of the crowd and walked towards a remote alley. When there were no more people around, Bucky cursed in a low voice. What's the situation? Are you really looking for me? Am I so handsome that even the princess of a country is fascinated? It's so romantic. Kia covered her mouth and smiled gracefully. Uncle Bucky, how did you meet that princess? I want to hear, Shuma clamored. Kabaji leaned his back against the wall, half of his hair swaying in the wind. Sure enough, the windy Captain Bucky is the direction I should pursue. Bucky raised his forehead helplessly. I'm more depressed than you guys about this matter. I don't want to get involved with any princess. Pulp, puff, puff. Bucky's phone bug rang, and it belonged to that Doyle guy. Bucky picked up the phone bug. Hello. It's me, Sherlock Doyle. The voice over there revealed a trace of dignity. I know. Bucky felt something was wrong, and asked in a deep voice, what happened? Doyle said, I lost contact with Chief Jas and Chief Tinker. What happened? I don't know, but there is no response to the phone calls to the two of them. Both of them set off from the sea to Wylan. I wonder if they encountered any accidents on the way. Maybe they were captured by Sheila. Abducted? The crocodile and the shadow man are not weak, and there are many elite subordinates. Can this Sheila deal with these two big pirate groups? Boss Tinker and Jas are devil fruit capable users, and they have no resistance to seawater. It is very likely that Shi Luo took advantage of this weakness. Of course, this is just my guess. It's really a headache. Bucky looked back and forth uncomfortably at all kinds of people in the alley. This kind of thing happened. Then what do you think next? Doyle on the phone worm pondered for a moment, then said slowly, Boss Bucky, do you have anything to do with the princess of this country? No. Bucky replied helplessly. Now I have an idea. What do you think? Welland Center, Kingdom Castle. This huge castle is the country's supreme ruler, King Chiro France, and the royal family's basic necessities. Although it is said to belong to the royal family, in fact, the wife of Chiro France had an accident many years ago and unfortunately died. The so-called royal family is only left with the daughter of Chiro France. Afterwards, Chiro France devoted all of his love to his wife to his daughter, Kixilu, and he would try his best to satisfy any request her daughter had. In the castle hall at this time, the light from the window came in through the skylight and sprinkled on the red carpet extending to the corridor. 4 or 5 maids with good faces on both sides lowered their heads slightly, motionless like statues stand still. Walking along the promenade behind the castle, a middle-aged man wrapped in a red cloak, with slightly gray temples and a hint of wisdom in his eyes came walking. He slowly sat on the spacious and comfortable throne in the middle, and the guards behind him stood beside him. Chiro France nodded, and the 2 most front maids in the castle hall came forward and gently massaged his forehead and temples. After a while, the light from the skylight in the castle was suddenly covered by 2 wide and long bat wings, as if the night had fallen, but the next moment, the light in the castle was restored again. A black shadow flashed past the skylight, and the 2 blue fleshy wings on the black shadow's back shrank around his body like a cocoon, and rushed into the castle through the open skylight, followed by his nearly 2-meter-long blue wings. The wings spread out again, flapping up and down in the air, gradually reducing the flapping frequency, and landed firmly on the ground. Kisu, you are finally back. How is the task entrusted to you? Franz closed his eyes, and with a wave of his right hand, The maids beside him all backed away half-bent. Your Majesty, you have already obtained it. Kisu's body gradually shrunk and returned to a normal human figure. At first glance he looked like an elegant gentleman. The matter entrusted to you is really reassuring to me. Bring it here and show me. Yes. Kisu stepped forward respectfully, and took out from his body a golden bead the size of a pupil whose blood had dried off. Franz finally raised his eyelids, stretched out his thumb and forefinger to take the golden bead from Kisu's hand, raised his head slightly, held it in front of his forehead and looked at it slowly. Under the sunlight, the golden beads reflected a crystal clear red on. This is the golden pupil. I have been looking for it for so many years, and now I finally found it. Franz's right hand holding the golden pupil trembled slightly, and there was an excitement on his face that he hadn't shown for a long time. Your Majesty, I still don't quite understand. Is this thing really so useful? Kisu had been by Franz's side when he was the president of the Silo's Chamber of Commerce. In his memory, the master was indifferent and calm most of the time. Even when he was with his daughter, Kixilu, he was not. He had shown the excitement from the inside out, but now a bead actually has such a great magic power. Kisu didn't know what kind of meaning the existence of this kind of thing had. With this thing, I have the bargaining chip to trade with the devil. I have waited for so many years, and finally, I can finally revive her. Resurrection. Kisu was slightly taken aback. Is that Lord Demon? Yeah, he is the only one in this world who can do this kind of thing. Franz said, carefully put the golden pupil into the close-fitting clothes, then turned his head to look at the empty air somewhere and said, I know you have been there. Our agreement will always be valid, and we will continue to pay attention to it. Please tell that lord, and ask him not to break our promise. There was no movement or response in the air, and everyone in the hall lowered their heads as usual. They didn't know what was there, but no one dared to speak out to ask the supreme ruler of this country. After a while, a handsome man in bright silver clothing walked into the castle hall. He knelt on one knee. See your Majesty the king. Franz raised his hand slightly. Get up, Xiao He. Have you found that person? That. Helion stood up, gritted his teeth secretly. Mr. Buggy has been brought here, and now he is waiting outside the castle. Franz smiled slightly. Really? Is the man my daughter likes here? Let him in. Yes. Helion stepped back and walked outside. Your Majesty the king. Kisu couldn't help but said, is it the rookie big pirate who recently offered a reward of over 136 million? Franz nodded slightly. Kisu whispered, Your Majesty, but. Franz reached out to stop Kisu's words. As long as it is something my daughter cares about, I will do everything possible to get it. Yes. Kisu said no more, and retreated to the sides. Finally, under the guidance of Helion, a man wearing a dark blue shark dress and crocodile leather shoes walked in. His sea blue hair was tied into a bunch on his back, and the corner of his mouth under his red nose was raised. A sharp arc, compared with the photos on the reward list. Real people have a full sense of crisis. Franz narrowed his eyes and looked at the person in front of him. Are you Bucky? My lord. Bucky paused, and he didn't like the emphasis on such words, so he simply said, I'm Bucky. I heard that the princess of your country wants to see me. Bucky really wants to see what a princess of a country looks like. Is it true that his personality is so great that he can make a princess of a country who has never masked himself fall in love with him? Or is this a trap? Franz looked at Helion and ordered, Xiao He, let Xiao Lu come over. Yes. Helion bit her lip and walked into the castle. Franz said, Bucky, if you are willing to marry Xiao Lu and become my son-in-law, then after my death, the crown of laurels on my head will also be yours. Since the king values me so much, I will naturally live up to your expectations. If you are willing to marry the princess, I. Before Bucky finished speaking, Helion's voice came from the back corridor. Bucky glanced at it out of the corner of his eye, swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and couldn't speak anymore. I saw a huge head poking out cautiously from behind the wall, blinking its eyes, showing the state of a shy little woman on its face. The arm holding the wall was thicker than an ordinary person's calf. Chi Qianlu pursed her lips lightly, and said shyly, Mr. Bucky. It's you. Bucky's tongue became a little knotted, and he became inflexible. There have been several princesses of the country in the original book, whether it is Vivi or Rebecca, their looks are super class level. Even the princesses of Lilliputian and Murloc have unique cuteness and beauty. But this princess is actually an obese woman whom he unintentionally saved in that small village. Can this image really be regarded as a princess of a country? Hey. Really not kidding. Xiao Lu, come out quickly. Franz smiled when he saw his precious daughter. Yes, father. Kixilu came out timidly. She was wearing a light white large dress, and her whole body looked very bloated, like walking out of a large bucket of water. As soon as she walked out, she was shy and afraid of running away. Beside Franz, he kept shaking the latter's arm. Father. Bucky's brows twitched. He always felt that if he continued to shake like this, the arm of the king and supreme ruler would be pulled off. Although Franz enjoys being coquettish with his daughter, but at this time it is not good to continue this in front of everyone. For fear of damaging his majesty, he patted the back of Kixilu's hand. Okay, little Lu. What? Chi Qianlu suddenly found that her sweetheart was still watching in front of her. She quickly turned around and covered her face shyly. Franz looked at Bucky. This is my daughter, Bucky, what do you think? Bucky said without blushing, Her Royal Highness is beautiful and delicious. N. Franz nodded, since the two of you agree with each other, the wedding will be held tomorrow. Bucky slowly closed his eyes, but, as the king ordered. Father, I want to be alone with him for a while. Okay, Xiao Lu, you go there first. I still have something to talk to my future son-in-law, and I will ask someone to take him there later. Franz said dotingly, looking at Helion who was on the side. Xiaohe, take care of the princess. Then I'll go first. Kixilu turned her head 3 times and walked towards the apse. After a sweet kiss, she lifted the skirt of the dress slightly and ran shyly, while Helion followed behind Kixilu with a gray face. Bucky swallowed unnaturally, wiped the cold sweat off his forehead without any trace, and looked up at Franz. If the king has anything to say, just say it. Franz said to a follower beside him, take it and show it to him. The attendant walked up to Bucky, took out a photo and handed it over. Bucky picked it up without knowing why, and after looking at it, his expression became a little serious. It was a photo of Tinker and Jas being locked up in a prison. Bucky looked up at Franz. These two guys, I didn't expect to be caught by you. Franz said calmly. I've laid a lot of hidden nails in Little Chambord over the years, and your actions have always been under my control. Don't think that I don't know what your plans are. You are want to leave here, it's been 6 years. No pirate has ever left here in the past 6 years. If you set a precedent, then there will be endless pirates trying to leave in the future. I have built this place for many years. The Dao barrier will naturally be broken without attacking, which is absolutely not allowed by me. Hearing what Franz said, Bucky narrowed his eyes slightly and observed the distance between him and Franz. The distance is about 20 meters. According to his current speed, it is entirely possible that Franz could not react. The situation has developed to the present. The best way is to capture the thief first and capture the king. Bucky stepped back slightly for half a step, ready to exert strength. In the midst of this flash, the tense muscles on his body relaxed, and he looked at a figure coming out from behind Franz in some surprise. Let me introduce you, Bucky. Franz was very satisfied with Bucky's surprised expression at this time, and said slowly, this is the former vice admiral, but he has retired, and now he is the king's guest, General Ghost. The king is actually able to include a vice admiral in the navy. What a unique means. Bucky's eyes fell on the gloomy ghost general, who was standing next to Franz, with a gray hood on his head and a long and narrow gash on his face from the upper right of his forehead to the lower left of his cheek. There was a flash of coldness. Franz laughed and said, there is nothing in this world that money cannot do. As long as there are enough interests to drive, the navy and the pirates can also become a family. Bucky didn't say anything, but the ghost general looked at Bucky with interest. You are Bucky the clown. I've paid close attention to you a long time ago. How early is very early? Bucky said with a half smile. General Ghost said sullenly. When I was still serving in the navy, there was a soldier I liked very much among my subordinates, but later he was transferred to the East China Sea. I heard that he has now been promoted to the captain of the navy branch. You should know him well. His name is a mouse, but unfortunately he has been away from the headquarters for too long, and he thought I was still in the navy working hard for those bastards who didn't know how to adapt. However, during that call, I knew that there was a clown in the East China Sea guy. It turned out to be the mouse that got into the money's eye. It's really not a family, if you don't enter a family. Bucky just murmured in a low voice, but didn't answer the ghost general. Franz continued. Bucky, this route is impassable. This large vortex is formed by the magnetic force of this island and the island group to the east of the vortex. The probability of passing this vortex is very high. 1. Do you really think you can pass it so easily? Even if it can pass through the air, who can guarantee that there will be no accidents in this process? Even though I was born in this country since I was a child, I have never passed through this sea area from the air. Perhaps, the corpses of the pirates who passed through the air have already sunk into the sea. Sounds really scary. Give up the idea of moving forward. Stay here and marry my daughter. You will get countless gold and silver treasures, have endless glory and wealth. Isn't the dream of all pirates? Seeing a hint of excitement on Bucky's face, Franz said seductively, whether you are a pirate or what, I don't care, because my daughter likes you, and that alone is enough. Bucky, seize this opportunity. Not everyone can be favored by the goddess of luck. I am willing to use all my worth to buy your loyalty to me and love for my daughter. Life is like a stage. Sometimes you have to stand on it and act in a play. Bucky never thinks that his acting skills are very good. Maybe he can only be regarded as passable, or not, but in a specific environment under such circumstances, human potential can always be stimulated, including things like acting. In the conversation with Franz just now, Bucky felt like an old drama player with many years of acting experience. His actions and expressions were progressively filled with emotions of struggle, nostalgia, wandering and surrender, and finally broke out. I see. I will marry your daughter, tomorrow. Double happiness coming to the door is a grand event for the country. Waiting until tomorrow, the king will open the national treasure, add a dowry, and celebrate with the whole country. Please, sir. The maid who was leading the way in front stopped, turned slowly to face Bucky, and lowered her head respectfully. Bucky's thoughts were interrupted, and he suddenly came back to his senses. His eyes fell on the sunlight shining in on the black and white floor. Well, it's a bit harsh. He turned around and walked to the terrace outside the castle. This open-air platform is located on the third floor of the castle, stretching out in a circular arc shape, and there are two figures standing on the platform, Kixilu and Helion. Bucky let out a deep breath in his heart, walked forward, leaned his hands on the guardrail made of fine marble, looked at the mountains and rivers in the distance, and looked down at an unknown statue in front of the castle and the ants outside the defense circle. The crowds that come and go are a little different from the situation when looking at the city of Wylan on the hillside. Only by standing in the very center of Wylan can you feel the prosperity of the city more clearly and intuitively. Bah. Bah. Kixilu was standing beside Bucky, lowering her head shyly. When Bucky approached, her chest was pounding like a deer. The indescribable excitement made her a kind of blissful dizziness surged in her mind, and she mumbled the words again and again, but still shyly did not call out her name. The scenery here. Bucky only said the word, this, and Kixilu suddenly shouted excitedly and interrupted Bucky, Mr. Bucky, are you calling me? Buggy wanted to pretend to be lyrical, to express his love appropriately, but the other party was so close to him, and his voice was as loud as setting off firecrackers, his eardrums were so shaken that it hurt a little, and he suddenly lost his eloquence. In the middle of the conversation, the tone became a little cold and said, don't be noisy. I don't like you talking so loudly. Helion was originally standing in the corner 2 meters away from the two of them. When he heard Bucky's tone, he suddenly walked up to Bucky's side and said angrily, you bastard, you are so rude to Her Highness the Princess. Just as Helion finished speaking, she was pushed away vigorously by Kixilu who was behind her. Kixilu covered her mouth, tears of joy flashed in her eyes, and she murmured, I have never seen such a domineering man before. Is really charming, I am so happy, I can meet my Prince Charming in my lifetime. Helion stared at Chi Qianlu dumbfounded, then at Bucky, finally turned his head unwillingly, and covered his heart with his right hand. He felt his heart was crying. Bucky glanced lightly at the guard who spoke disrespectfully to his son-in-law. Can you let this annoying fly leave here? Our date shouldn't be interrupted by a third person, right? A date. Chi Qianlu didn't take a breath, her feet were weak, and she almost fell. Her right hand quickly supported the marble guardrail, and she breathed a sigh of relief before saying, Helion, go inside and wait. Helion quickly said, Princess. The king said. Chi Qianlu abruptly interrupted Helion's words and cursed. Don't you even listen to my words? Even if the father is here, he will follow my wishes, let alone you. As she spoke, she realized that she had lost her composure in front of her sweetheart, and quickly changed into a pleading tone of a little woman. Helion, you go out first, Mr. Bucky and I have very important things to discuss. Yes. Helion had never heard Kixilu speak in this way before, and he was willing to change for a man who could be called a stranger. He couldn't help feeling deeply decadent and frustrated, and turned around. Withdrew from the terrace. Seeing that Helion left and there were only 2 people left on the terrace, Kixilu couldn't help but sweated. She took a peek at Bucky, and asked in a low voice, Can we start dating? I don't know your name yet, Your Highness. Bucky looked at Kixilu's bucket-like figure and thick arms, and really couldn't think of anything. After all, human beings are animals that depend on first impressions. Often have an advantage over others. Kixilu replied nervously. My name is Sheila Kixilu. Bucky said lightly. We are getting married tomorrow, right? Tomorrow. Get married. Chi Qianlu murmured repeatedly, nodding her head like a chicken pecking rice. Yes, yes. What will happen tomorrow? Tell me, Kixilu. From the moment just now, Bucky has been very concerned about what the double happiness refers to that King Sheila said. Now that the guy named Helion is missing, and the two of them are alone, he naturally wants to be in this seemingly not only fat, but also less intelligent women to inquire about important information. Tomorrow, my royal father will marry a very beautiful woman. The contract can only be concluded after marriage. This is also a necessary part of resurrecting my mother. Say what you want. Resurrection. Buggy frowned slightly. He felt that the other party didn't look like he was lying, and asked again, how long has your mother passed away? It's been 7 years since I passed away. As soon as she mentioned her mother, Qi Qianlu's expression suddenly became a little sad. Can the dead 7 years ago be resurrected now? Buggy pondered. In the world of One Piece, there is indeed someone who has been brought back to life. It is Brook who possesses the power of the fruit of the underworld, but he can only let himself have a second life. Is there really such power to bring someone back to life? Buggy was full of doubts, and asked, what kind of contract? Can bring your mother back to life? Father won't let me ask more questions. I only know that the soul of the living is exchanged with the soul of the dead. The woman who will marry my father will be the medium of the contract. Qi Qianlu glanced at Buggy secretly, and then said, the content of the contract includes those things in the king's treasury. After talking with Qixilu, Buggy finally grasped some key information. Then, I'll take my leave. Buggy said to Qixilu lightly, and then looked up at the stone piers adorning the surface of the castle's stone wall. He always felt that there was something peeping at him, which made him a little uncomfortable. Mr. Buggy, please go to the room prepared for you and have a good rest. There was a hint of reluctance in Qi Qianlu's eyes, feeling that every minute and every second of leaving the other party, there would be a kind of emptiness in her heart. Buggy nodded slightly, and walked into the castle, leaving only Qixilu standing in the breeze. Her oversized skirt was blown up by the breeze, revealing her sturdy little feet and large-sized crystal shoes, and the hair on her temples was also it became a little swaying with the wind, just like her mood, complicated and messy. Buggy walked into the corridor in the castle, and Helion was still standing against the wall. As Buggy appeared in the field of vision, his eyes followed him closely. You bastard. What are you doing to the princess? What a bad idea. I didn't make any plans, and it's not up to you, a subordinate, to tell me what to do. By the way, what's your name? Buggy didn't like this troublesome kid very much. Helion gritted her teeth secretly, and said in a low voice, my name is Bob Helion, you red-nosed bastard, I want to challenge you as a knight. The corners of Buggy's eyes narrowed slightly, and a sly smile was drawn on the corner of his mouth. Refuse. You. Before Helion could finish speaking, Buggy interrupted in ignorance, and looked at the maid who was waiting respectfully. Let's go. Yes, sir. The maid lowered her head slightly and led the way. Facing Buggy's contempt, Helion once wanted to pull out the knight's sword in his hand, but after much deliberation, he finally put down his right hand from the hilt and watched Buggy's figure disappear at the end of the corridor weakly. There was no fight, but he feels like he's lost. Led by the maid, Buggy came to a clean and bright room. He turned his back to the maid waiting at the door, waiting to be dispatched. You go out first, don't let anyone in. Yes. The maid exited the room and closed the door. Buggy took off the unnatural dark blue shark dress outside, and threw it on the bed, revealing the loose bottom shirt, and then looked around the corners of the ceiling and all the hidden places in the room to make sure there were no phone bugs like bugging, finally sat on the comfortable big bed. The bed was comfortable, though not quite as comfortable as the one in Santander's bedroom. Buggy took out the phone bug he was carrying, and was about to dial out, when suddenly, his brows tightened, his left hand grabbed the blue dress that was just thrown on the boat, and threw it to the air position near the door. After being thrown by Buggy to the empty place, the blue dress was suddenly suspended in the air as if hitting something, before being slapped on the ground immediately. Buggy stood up and walked step by step towards the place where the air was. His pupils reflected his eyes that seemed to see through everything. Suddenly, the door of the room opened strangely, and there was a slight sound of footsteps. Just the moment the door was opened, Buggy's right fist suddenly separated from his wrist and hit towards the door. Boom. It was obviously hitting towards the door, but the wall of the promenade opposite the door was sunken in an arc, and dense cracks like spider webs appeared on the wall. Immediately afterwards, a figure finally appeared. He was dressed gorgeously, with a white round top hat on top of his head. The nose, mouth and jaw seemed to be cut from the body of a beast and then reinstalled. Just the next moment after his appearance, his body disappeared again and turned into transparency. This guy, Buggy stopped when he reached the door, and did not chase outside. In fact, when this guy became transparent, he could no longer tell the exact location of the other party, and his identity here is a guest. It is enough to drive the other party away. There is no need to make unnecessary entanglements. However, what surprised Buggy was that the invisible man under Shichibukai Moonlight Mariah would appear here. What is the purpose of the other party? No longer thinking about it, after returning to the room, Buggy closed the door and picked up the blue shark dress on the ground. After vigilantly looking around the room again, he picked up the phone bug. After Doyle and Buggy negotiated, the original idea was that Buggy took the initiative to expose himself in front of King Chiro. The first was to test Fran's hole cards, and the second was to inquire about the news of the Shadowman Tinker and the Predator Jas. At present, although these two goals have been achieved, the situation is worse than expected. There is a retired lieutenant general next to Franz, and this retirement is not due to age. And it may be due to factors such as abusing power and confiscating money. That is to say, this ghost general is a vice admiral in his prime. Vice admiral. What kind of concept is this? You must know that the strongest combat power in the Navy is the three generals, Red Dog, Blue Pheasant and Yellow Monkey. These three generals usually sit in the headquarters of the Navy, and every action must be approved by the world government. Under the general, it is the rank of lieutenant general. Since the general belongs to the Navy's trump card, he cannot act arbitrarily. The backbone of the sea operations all the year round is the vice admiral. This level is all-powerful. For example, although Garp is at the level of lieutenant general, his strength is actually comparable to that of a general. For example, several lieutenant generals who are eligible to be selected as alternate generals, T-Pig and Peach Rabbit. Even the weaker Vigor, Ghost Spider, Flying Squirrel, Doberman, etc., are all well-known people. Since he can be promoted to the rank of lieutenant general, the strength of this ghost general is naturally not weak. With this lieutenant general in command, it is no wonder that Shiro Franz has full confidence. And Tinker and Jas were indeed captured by Franz, although there was speculation before, but Bucky and Doyle had a bit of luck, and after seeing the photo taken with their own eyes, this fluke thoughts are absolutely gone. Bucky didn't expect that he could find out so much useful information so quickly. After all, Franz was born as a businessman. He is very experienced in lowering and raising prices. Using force to deter and warn the fate of the other two captains, and then using profit to seduce. Although this hand of stick and carrot exposed the cards, it did play an obvious role. At least, Bucky did feel the pressure from the lieutenant general. If you were an ordinary pirate, you would be faced with an illusory and dangerous future, and another option to enjoy a comfortable life of prosperity and wealth. You would know which one to choose, but it's a pity that the person Franz wooed. He is a restless traveler. Bucky squinted slightly and looked at the scenery outside the window, holding the dialed phone bug. Hello, Doyle. I think our plan should be adjusted appropriately. Kingdom Castle, at the end of the promenade on the first floor. Shiro Franz was wrapped in a red coat and stopped in front of the door. He said softly to the soldiers on both sides, "Open it." The guards on both sides stepped forward expressionlessly, and slowly pushed open the heavy door in front of them with all their strength. As soon as the door opened, a biting frost gushed out like a stream of water. Franz's face was a little pale against the backdrop of the frost. He put his hand in front of his mouth, coughed twice, and then withdrew his hands in his coat, and walked into the mist. Frost and cold hit the face, and fine ice crystals formed in the air, but Franz took it for granted and ignored it, and continued to walk in. After dozens of steps, he finally stopped in front of a crystal coffin. He stretched out his hand to caress the transparent coffin cover of the coffin, looked at the young and beautiful woman inside with a snowy complexion, and murmured in a low voice. "Shaw, you must be very tired after lying down for so many years, don't you? Hurry up, soon. Soon, we will be able to meet again." As he said that, Franz chuckled in ecstasy. Kixilu has grown up now, and she has also found her beloved husband. When you wake up, we will be able to reunite as a family. You can also take a good look at how much our child looks like you. Cough cough. A figure suddenly appeared in the air at the side, and the invisible man Abu Shalom finally couldn't help coughing out, thinking of Kixilu's bloated figure in his mind, and then having sex with the young woman in front of him. In contrast, it was hard for him to imagine how Franz actually said the words, "The two look alike." Franz turned his head and glanced at Absalom. "What's wrong with your face?" It's okay if Franz didn't say anything. As soon as he said it, Absalom felt his cheeks were extremely painful. He stretched out his hands to rub the bruises on his face, and said angrily, "It's not your son-in-law. Baki did something good. No wonder this red-nosed bastard has a bounty of more than 100 million, his power is really great." As he spoke, he grinned slowly, revealing the 2 rows of fangs in his mouth, if he also dedicates his soul to Lord Moria. "He's my daughter's favorite, so it's best not to get his attention." Shi Luo said slowly, "Our transaction is limited to those few things in the treasure house." "Haha, it's better that you have good things in your so-called treasury, otherwise you will have to bear the anger of a king Shichibukai." Absalom suddenly changed his subject. "However, I'm still very puzzled. What on earth are you doing?" "Know about us?" Franz said lightly. "I used to be a businessman. I have been sailing at sea for a long time, and I have naturally heard a lot of rumors on the sea. I heard that Moonlight Moria has the power to communicate life and death and bring the dead back to life." "Is that so?" Absalom laughed inexplicably. "Yes. Master Moria does have similar abilities. It is to replace the souls of the living and the dead. I have prepared the medium of the contract. As for the items to be traded, they are hidden in the king's treasury. Now I have got the key to open the treasury. What do I think? When will Moonlight Moria come over to complete the contract between us? Lord Moria will not come here, he has entrusted me with full authority over this matter. Absalom grinned. Franz looked at Absalom in surprise. Do you also have the power to bring the dead back to life? No, I will take everything back. After the operation is completed, you can go to Lord Moria's ship to retrieve what you deserve. Impossible. I can't let you touch Shia's body at will. Franz suddenly roared. That's not what we said when we traded. Absalom stretched out his little finger and licked his ear. I don't know the content and conversation between you and Lord Moria, but if you don't want to, we can terminate the transaction now. Franz's complexion was like a bullfighting bull's, his eyes were red, and finally, as if he had aged 10 years in an instant, he bent his body. Is there no room at all? If you repeat it, I will not say it a second time, Your Majesty the Kingdom. Yes, I see, I will go with you to Moonlight Moria. That's fine too, but you have to know that if your tribute doesn't satisfy Lord Moria, but delays my time. Absalom grinned grinningly, revealing his modified jaw and cheeks together. The fangs looked a little scary. I won't let you down. Franz shrank his body due to the intrusion of the surrounding cold, and finally took a last look at the woman in the coffin, turned around and walked out slowly. It's better as you said, otherwise even my cemetery King Absalom won't spare you. Absalom turned his head and looked at the young woman lying in the crystal coffin. Following Franz's footsteps, his body gradually became transparent. Time passed quietly, and around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning of the next day, the door of Bucky's room was opened, and a group of handsome maids came in with a complete set of dresses, boots, washbasins and other toiletries in their hands. In fact, Bucky didn't fall asleep either. He just sat on the bed and closed his eyes to rest his mind. When he saw the people in front of him, he knew their purpose. Is this day finally coming? After washing up, he put on the expensive white dress under the service of the maids, and sat patiently on the chair. After a while, a middle-aged man with the appearance of a butler pushed the door in. Lord Bucky, please come with me. Bucky nodded, stood up and followed behind the middle-aged man. All the way through the promenade of the Kingdom Castle, and came to the entrance of the main hall on the first floor. Kixilu also came out from the other promenade, just in time to meet Bucky. She was wearing a dress like a mermaid tail below the knee. An oversized white mermaid wedding dress with a wide skirt, but this kind of wedding dress made her figure appear wide and big, without the beauty and tension of a mermaid tail at all. However, it's just for fun, so don't expect anything. Bucky stepped forward, walked side by side with Chi Qianlu on the bright red carpet, and walked out. Be Mr. Bucky. I. Kixilu stood beside Bucky and spoke in a low voice, but the latter said indifferently, don't talk. Yes. Chi Qianlu suddenly responded in a low voice with some excitement. According to the procedure, when the princess gets married, she and her husband need to go around the whole island, and finally return to the Kingdom Castle to hold the wedding. In fact, that was exactly the case. Bucky and Kixilu walked out of the castle and stepped into a very gorgeous carriage. Numerous soldiers guarded the road on both sides of the street, including the Princess Knight Helion. All the pedestrians on the side of the road stopped and watched. This nationally known wedding will be held with great grandeur next. There were crowds of people on both sides of the street, and everyone either crowded around the street or opened their windows, curiously watching this grand and solemn wedding and the two wedding protagonists standing on the gorgeous carriage. The music played and the gun salute cleared the way ahead, and the warm atmosphere continued to spread towards the distance. In order to hold this wedding, a large part of the security team in the royal city and the soldiers in charge of the kingdom's castle were dispatched to maintain the order. Even the jailers in charge of the dungeon had to be dispatched of sudden accidents. Bucky stood on the carriage, watching the crowd below secretly pointing and whispering to him, but he couldn't help showing a smile on his face, but he was a little stiff. He doesn't like the feeling of being restrained by the white dress on his body in the eyes of the people below. This kind of cutscene really makes people feel uncomfortable, but now, the drama should be more adequate. He stretched out his hand to hold Kixilu's big hand that felt like a ball of dough, and raised it high. The people on both sides of the street immediately puffed up their palms very cooperatively. They were more or less envious of Bucky's luck. Although Kixilu's appearance was not very good looking, they couldn't help that she was a princess of a country, and her identity was power. And a symbol of wealth. Furthermore, Shi Luo is only a daughter. If there is no accident, the red nose in front of me may inherit the throne of the king in the future. It was not the first time that Kixilu was exposed to the public sight. In fact, all the people were used to having such a princess who was not out of shape under the king's knees, so they didn't think that Kixilu's clothes at this time there was something wrong, and Chi Qianlu didn't care about the gazes of those people at all. At this moment, Bucky held his hand, and her mind went blank. And this wedding has only just begun. Outside the king's castle, in the barracks leading to the dungeon. The whole room smelled of mellow wine. Wine bottles were piled up all over the table, and 4 or 5 guards sat on the chairs, snoring again and again. The door of the barracks was quietly pushed open, and the candles on the table that were about to bottom out were suddenly blown out by the breeze brought by the door, and the stone walls that had faintly reflected light under the candlelight suddenly became dim. A guard who fell asleep with his neck on his back suddenly shivered and looked around in a daze. He still didn't know what happened, but felt that the back of his head was hit by a huge force, and he felt dizzy again. Then lowered his head unconsciously. Several figures who had filed in earlier also knocked heavily on the backs of the heads of the other soldiers, making sure that all the soldiers in the barracks fell asleep before looking at the leader. Take all the keys from them. Doyle looked at the guards. Yesterday, he managed to stuff some money to a certain restaurant cook who was in charge of the soldiers' meals, and sent over a basket of high-alcohol, mellow rice wine along with the meals. Sure enough, as expected, the group of guards drank all the uninvited rice wine with great interest, and the result was that the guards in the barracks became like a piece of thin paper that could be broken easily. Paper. However, some of the guards were mobilized to maintain the order of the wedding. Otherwise, even if Doyle could successfully break in, it would definitely not be in such a peaceful situation, but it is very likely to cause a strong commotion. Will become very troublesome. The present timing can be said to be just right. Captain. Several capable cadres of Doyle found a ring of keys on the guards and surrounded them again. Very well, let's go down. A smile hung on Doyle's face. After trying all the keys in the key ring in his hand, he found the right key and finally opened the iron door of the underground passage. Doyle and his party walked slowly towards the dark and damp underground. There are not many prisoners in the cell, and each cell has almost only one prisoner wearing a prison uniform. However, the faces and spirits of this group of prisoners are not very good, and all of them are covered with scars. It seems that they have suffered a lot of abuse and abuse penalty. And there were not many guards patrolling the dungeon, only a few of them. Before they could make a sound, they were knocked to the ground by the cadres of the Silver Wing pirates with quick eyesight and quick hands. As Doyle walked forward, he looked left and right. The dungeon was not as tight as he imagined, and there was no surveillance phone bug in the corner that could deliver instant messages. This made Doyle heave a sigh of relief in his heart. Things wouldn't be so troublesome if there were no monitoring phone bugs. Hey, help me. At first, these prisoners looked at Doyle and his party numbly. After the cadres of the Silver Wing pirates took action and subdued the guards, they finally felt that something was wrong and quickly got up, crawling like earthworms. His hands with veins rested on the grill and kept shaking, and the chains on his wrists kept making jingling sounds. Puff. Doyle's silver-white cane turned around in the air like a magic trick, and saw a flash of silver light, and a cold light fell impartially on the neck of the nearest prisoner leaning on the grill, and immediately the palm of the hand was turned 90 degrees, and a head flew out from the neck in an instant. The blood sprayed out like a spring, and the corpse collapsed powerlessly on the ground, leaving only one finger still twitching instinctively. Doyle didn't know when he had retracted the silver-white rapier into his cane, and his body wasn't stained with blood at all. He turned his head and glanced at the dumbfounded prisoners in the other cells who didn't dare to make any more noises. There was an approachable smile on his face. Don't trouble me. The prisoners swallowed with expressions changed drastically, and carefully held the chains in their hands. How could they dare to make a big noise? Although they would be abused by the jailers from time to time, at least they could survive. But if you angered the man in front of you who drew a knife to kill someone who didn't agree with each other, what you want is your own life. Doyle needed this effect. He took a step and continued to walk deep into the dungeon. He went all the way to the depths of the dungeon and did not see Tinker, Jas and their men. Doyle went down the stairs and went to the next level of the dungeon. After walking to the next level of the dungeon, the surrounding environment obviously became quieter. The faint candlelight illuminated the empty cell. After walking a few steps, I finally saw some figures. And Ting in the water prison. Jack and Jas. Doyle had seen these people in Little Shampoo. They were under Tink and Jas, but at this moment they were all pale. Their figures looked much thinner than before, and their hands were cuffed with heavy chains and a hammer, lying or sitting in the prison, showing a lifeless appearance. Tinker and Jas in the water dungeon looked even more ugly. Their faces were disheveled, their hands were hanging from the chains on the wall, and their lower bodies were submerged in the water. You are the captain of the Silver Wing Pirates? One of the pirates, who had seen Doyle before on the small shambord, looked at the few people who appeared in the second dungeon in surprise. When he made a sound, the others also looked up at Doyle. Captain Doyle, let's get out. Silver Wing, save our captain first. The pirates immediately regained their spirits and gathered around the grill, talking one after another. Doyle told his men, "Go and rescue them." After searching for the key for a while, the cadres of the Silver Wing pirates opened all the doors of the cell, and more than a dozen pirates all ran out, and then the hammer chains tied to their bodies were also untied. These pirates opened a ring of keys on the door locks of the 2 water dungeons one by one, but none of the keys could open the door locks. Damn it, it can't be opened, these bloody bastards. Looking at the predators and the pirates under Jas, Doyle stretched out his arms and pushed them away. Get out of the way. The pirates looked at each other, and all backed away. Doyle held the hilt of the knife with his backhand, drew the sword himself, put the knife back into the sheath before everyone could react. A silver light flashed in the air, and then, the iron door lock and handcuffed on Jas' wrist his chains snapped. Captain Jas. Several pirates from the Crocodile Pirates swarmed up and rescued Jas from the water prison. Doyle then cut off the door lock and chains of another water prison in the same way, and the pirates of the Shadowman Pirates also ran forward excitedly to rescue their captain. After the two of them walked to Shongshui prison with the help of the pirates under him, Doyle said to the pale and sluggish two, "Are you all right?" Jas and Tinker didn't speak all the time, but closed their eyes and breathed continuously. Their bodies were so numb due to being soaked in the water for too long that they couldn't feel the sensation for a while. After a while, Jas, who recovered quickly, looked up at Doyle, and reluctantly held up a separate handcuff on his right wrist in front of him. "It's very important. This thing makes me very uncomfortable. Doyle, is there a way to take it off for me?" "This is." Doyle reached out and touched the handcuffs, felt the material of the handcuffs, and his face became a little dignified. "Halushi handcuffs. I'm afraid I can't destroy these." "Can't you?" Jas put his arms flat on the ground, his heart turned hard, "Then cut off my hand from here." "Don't worry, Chief Jas." Faced with Jas' words that didn't seem like a joke, Doyle was taken aback, and quickly persuaded, "We don't need to be so extreme. I can't stand this damn Halushi anymore." Jas roared suddenly, but the loud roar made his face look weaker, and he was panting heavily. Doyle turned to look at Tinker. "Boss Tinker, wouldn't you?" Tinker also stretched out an arm, and his tone was still very indifferent. "Me too." Doyle had a very headache now. He originally thought that he could save 2 new forces to increase his combat power against Sheila, but in the end, the 2 were weakened without limit. Halushi is indeed the natural enemy of ability users. The key to Halushi's handcuffs, we will find a way to find it later. Doyle first comforted him, and then asked, "But what's the matter with you? How did you get caught by Shi Luo?" After he finished speaking, the surrounding pirates immediately fell silent, and Tinker spoke concisely and slowly. "It's the current vortex." Doyle asked puzzledly, "See current vortex? It turns out that you were also caused by the current vortex." Just glanced at Tinker, and habitually wanted to look for cigars on his body, but after searching for a while, he found that there was nothing on his body. Kay's words explained to Doyle, "It is a 2-way vortex. On 2 specific sea surfaces that are nearly 100 kilometers apart, 2 vortexes will appear at the same time, one is the entrance and the other is the exit. As long as the ship is involved in the vortex entrance, it will be swallowed by the vortex, and then through the complex movement of the underwater current, it will be ejected from the vortex outlet nearly 3 kilometers away. My boat was sucked in by this vortex, and then ejected from the vortex outlet. It was shot by Sheila. Someone got caught here, and I think this guy is probably like me." When Jace said, "this guy," he meant Tinker. Doyle said in surprise, "Both of you were involved. How could such a coincidence happen?" Tinker said indifferently, "It's not a coincidence, we should have been eyeing Sheila a long time ago. This country has a unique turbine technology. By manipulating some kind of mechanism turbine under the island, it can form convection on the seabed and create a 2-way vortex. Perhaps. The partitioned eddy in front of this island is the product left after this turbine technology went berserk." "What?" Doyle yelled uncontrollably, and he quickly lowered his voice. "I saw the rumors of cutting off the large eddy current in the royal letters, which seem to have existed hundreds of years ago. Could it be that there was such a thing at that time? An advanced technology to change the direction of ocean currents?" Tinker said, "This world has existed since 4,000 years ago, and even before ancient times, there were countless gaps in history. Who knows what the world was like in that period, and what the predecessors would leave behind? What's more, there was a history of disappearance 800 years ago. Who can tell the secrets in this world clearly? Even if this kind of turbine technology existed hundreds of years ago, it is not a rare thing." Jas rarely echoed, "This guy is right. This kind of thing is not uncommon. I have been in Shaoshambold for 5 or 6 years, and I have sent people to find some information and materials. I am used to seeing strange things. It's nothing. However, I have thought about it for the past few days. If we want to pass through this large vortex, we may rely on this turbine technology." Doyle became interested. "Let's hear it. Let's get out of here first." Tinker interrupted the conversation between the two, and he stood up slowly with the support of several subordinates. All right, Doyle said, then before leaving here, I'd better explain the current situation. If you can save you, there is a great sacrifice by the leader of Buggy. Then, we should. Although Buggy and Kixilu's wedding took place around Wylan, in fact, they only toured in the inner city with strict guards and relatively safe. After all, the closer to the outer city, the more unstable factors there will be. Even the supreme ruler of this kingdom couldn't cover everything, and kept all corners strictly guarded. Franz actually didn't want this wedding to be messed up. After all, it was the wedding of his most beloved daughter. Everything I have done with my mind is to inform all the people that the supreme darling of this country will usher in her prince today. Amidst the attention, envy, and emotion of all the people, this touring wedding went around for an hour, and finally came to an end. Finally, the wedding carriage returned to the outskirts of the castle. Buggy and Kixilu got out of the wedding car, stepped on the red carpet stretching hundreds of meters and walked towards the king's castle in front of them. Looking up, Franz and a slender woman with a tool face were standing on the platform at the top of the top steps of the castle gate. Double happiness. Buggy narrowed his eyes slightly, and stared at the quiet woman next to Franz without leaving a trace. He always felt that he had seen this woman before, but he just couldn't remember it. The wedding has progressed to this moment without any accidents, which made Franz, who was standing on the high platform, laugh twice in satisfaction. He watched Buggy and Kixilu walking up step by step. His eyes gradually became brighter, and ripples gradually spread out in his heart that had been stagnant for so many years. Over the years, when the night was quiet, he would pick up the old photos on the coffee table and cabinet and look at them repeatedly, fascinated by the charming smile in the photos. After learning that there is a power to bring the dead back to life, Franz tried his best to contact Moonlight Moria in the 7 martial seas under the king, hoping that the other party could resurrect his dead wife. He was willing to trade with Moonlight Moria with a lot of wealth, but was ruthlessly rejected by the other party. After some entanglement, he finally reached an agreement with Moonlight Moria. Since then, he has been looking for the golden pupil to open the king's treasure house. Not long ago, he got clues about the golden pupil, and after some investigation, he finally learned of the whereabouts of the golden pupil, so he ordered Kisu, who had been staying in Shaoshampad, to find the treasure map hunter and get back the golden pupil on his body, Hitomi. At the same time Franz gave the order, Hildo happened to also appear in the Bloody Night Tavern, which allowed Kisu to succeed in the chaos. And Moonlight Moria received Franz's message of waiting patiently, but never got what she wanted, and finally lost her last patience, and decided to send Absalom to Wylan to investigate the real situation. Afterwards, Absalom came to Wylan and was entertained by Franz, and during this last period, Kisu got the golden pupil and reported the text message to Franz, which made this event possible. Terminated deals are renewed again. In addition to the external factors imposed by Moria, Franz himself is also very eager for this day to come. Only by completing this deal that has been prepared for many years as soon as possible can he see the smile from the heart on his wife's face after the resurrection again. At the thought of seeing his wife again, the ripples in Franz's heart gradually turned into waves, but he didn't know that Mariah's real ability was completely different from what he had imagined. After Buggy and Kixilu stepped up the steps and came to Franz's side, and the team below began to slowly close up, Franz nodded slightly to Kisu who was waiting by the side. Knowing the arrangement of the master who had followed him for many years, Kisu jumped up lightly, and the 2 blue bat wings on his back suddenly spread, gliding through the air, and landed on the unknown statue in front of the castle. I said, Buggy, I will use the treasures in the king's treasury to add luster to this wedding. Franz finished speaking to Buggy, then looked at Kisu who had landed on the statue. Open it. Could this statue be the switch of the king's treasury? Buggy looked at the statue standing on Kisu, his brows twitched, and he was slightly surprised. He had seen this statue when he came, but he always thought it was just a simple decorations, but who knew that the switch of the king's treasury would be blatantly erected here. This statue is 5 or 6 meters high, with a lion head and a human body, but the whole body is covered by a pair of wings on the back of the spine. At this moment, Kisu is standing on the shoulder of the lion head, groping for a while at the center of the forehead. Immediately, he took out the golden pupil that Franz had given him, and pressed it into a notch between the eyebrows of the lion's head. This golden pupil was inlaid between the eyebrows, like a magic pen. At that moment, everyone felt that the lion statue seemed to come alive suddenly, and they shuddered. A few soldiers present raised their spears excitedly, pointed at the statue, and stared at it in anticipation, but then they were pushed by the shoulders of the soldiers standing aside and woke up. After inlaying the golden pupils, Kisu returned to Franz from the shoulder of the statue, and, like everyone else, watched the statue's movements intently. I saw the golden pupil in the center of the forehead of the statue with the lion head and human body and wings reflected a faint red light under the sunlight, and then the statue began to rotate on the spot. The statue began to move bit by bit. The body of the statue, which was originally facing away from the king's castle, now turned sideways to Bucky and Franz, forming a 120-degree corner. On the ground directly in front of the statue, a fan-shaped passageway of stone steps was formed, exuding layers of red mist. Since the entire ground around the king's castle is connected in parallel, although Franz already knew the location of the entrance to the king's treasury, he did not dare to use violent means to destroy it, otherwise it might cause the entire castle to tilt. Serious consequences. In the years to come, the castle will collapse even more. Moreover, the peculiar material of the whole ground cannot be destroyed so easily. It may cost a lot of manpower and material resources. In the end, it is nothing but bamboo basket fetches water. At first everyone thought that the statue had stopped, but the statue suddenly started to rotate again, and then turned 120 degrees, and a fan-shaped passageway emitting thick red mist appeared on the ground again. Turning again, the direction of the lion's face finally turned its back on the castle again, and the third fan-shaped passageway also appeared. The three passages covered with lingering red mist finally connected together, turning into a circular passage with layers of downward steps. This is the king's treasury. Bucky stared at the red passageway, thinking to himself. Although Bucky is less than 5 meters away from Franz, he is not in a hurry to do it now. He still doesn't know what the so-called air springboard is and where it is hidden. The key is that Doyle and Jossie and the others hadn't come here yet, and instead of acting rashly, they would scare the snake away, and the meaning of this wedding was gone. Besides Bucky, everyone, including Franz, also felt a bit of surprise and amazement at the appearance of this underground passage in the red mist inside. Franz had not launched a rebellion in his early years. When he visited the former king as the president of the Silos Chamber of Commerce, he also saw this entrance with his own eyes. However, the red mist at that time was so light that it could hardly be seen clearly, not as thick as it is now. Thick. At this time, he recalled what the previous king had said in some books in the castle. The fog in the underground passage is the gas emitted by the source tree in the king's treasury. This source tree is the root of the immortal sea tree that connects Shaoshampod and Wylan. If a person wears an airtight coat and is exposed to the scorching sun, the surface of the skin will secrete a lot of sweat, and this source tree is like a human body. The root of the tree will secrete an invisible gas. In this enclosed space that lasted 6 years, the tree energy emitted by this source tree accumulated more and more. With the size of the space remaining the same, it had to be concentrated and squeezed step by step, and finally formed a shape that everyone could see. Get this foggy scene. However, this gas is not a harmful gas, but plays an irreplaceable role in the entire king's treasury. Franz slowly came back to his senses. It's the tree spirit of the source tree. Just as everyone's attention was focused on the entrance to the king's treasury, suddenly several figures rushed in from the guard circle with lightning speed, and one of the figures shouted extremely fast, "Bucky leader, take down Sheila." This voice belongs to Doyle. Although they didn't get along for a long time, Bucky and Doyle chatted on the phone bug for a long time and exchanged a lot of useful information, so he was quite familiar with this voice. Bucky was stunned for half a second, then reacted immediately. His figure flashed, his right hand bent into a claw in a flash, and he grabbed Franz. However, this half a second is enough to change a lot of things, and the 5 sharp lights came in an instant, forcing Bucky to shrink back, retreating a few meters away, and missed the best time. General Ghost stood beside Franz, with sharp wolf claws attached to his right hand, and looked at Bucky sullenly. "If you want to attack my employer, you have to pass me first." Bucky wanted to open his mouth to refute, but suddenly there was a burst of dizziness in his mind. He blinked fiercely a few times, then fell to his knees on the ground, and quickly supported himself with his right hand, feeling the strength in his body beating little by little. Drain. Boss Bucky. Doyle and several cadres of the Silver Wing Pirates flashed to Bucky's side. Doyle quickly helped Bucky up, and his heart sank. Luo took out the key to Heilushi's handcuffs, but there was a huge deviation between the current situation and the plan, and Doyle asked in a low voice, "What's going on?" "I don't know," Bucky replied. Following Doyle's surprise attack, the surrounding soldiers reacted instantly and surrounded them. Franz seemed to have expected that Bucky would make a move, but at this moment he breathed a sigh of relief, looked at the surrounded pirates, and shook his head. Shaking his head, "What a bunch of stubborn pirates. Did you poison me?" Bucky only felt that his eyelids were a little heavy, and he felt particularly strenuous when he was standing, and he was obviously very cautious. "No, it's not poison," Franz said calmly. "It's a kind of granular leech that is invisible to the naked eye. After being bitten by this kind of leech, a strange kind of particle will be incorporated into the blood. Talking or doing other things that are not too physically demanding will not feel abnormal within 24 hours, but if you use too much force, the particles will get stuck in key positions in the blood vessels along with the violent flow of blood. There will be a feeling of stiffness, but don't worry, after 24 hours, the particles will be automatically excreted from the body, and there is no harm to the human body. Mr. Baki. Kixilu was stunned for a long time at the sudden incident in front of her, and finally came back to her senses, looking at Baki in disbelief. Why did you do such a thing to my father? You're annoying. Baki just replied to Kixilu coldly, and his breathing became a little disordered. Franz looked at Qi Qianlu, who was pursing her lips. Xiao Lu, do you still like this guy? Qi Qianlu hesitated for half a second, then nodded like a chicken pecking rice, and Franz didn't persuade his daughter to change her mind, but just gave her a doting look. It doesn't matter, as long as I destroy that thing and catch all these pirates in one go. My son-in-law will also die. Stay here, don't worry, Xiao Lu. The things you like, the father will also take good care of you. Taking advantage of the gap between the two talking, Doyle twirled the silver cane in his hand, and rushed up instantly. Clang. Doyle pushed aside the silver cane with a sharp blade an inch inside, but was blocked by Helion, who was rushing towards him. The latter held a western sword in his hand against Doyle's silver cane, and looked at each other seriously. You sea creatures. The thief is really too presumptuous. Oh? Doyle's eyes flashed with surprise. Not bad swordsmanship. HMPH. Helion snorted softly, and the western sword in his hand circled, stirring up Doyle's silver cane, and suddenly stabbing at the opponent's chest. Doyle stepped back step by step, forcing the western sword to stab forward continuously. When the opponent's sword momentum came to an end, he adjusted his figure again, and rolled up the white cloak behind him like a magic trick. Wrapping his whole body, they were all wrapped in the cloak, and immediately turned defense into offense, and wrapped in the cloak, they flew towards Helion in the air. Helion hurriedly withdrew the arm holding the western sword, and suddenly stirred up countless sword flowers in the air. The white cloak was torn into countless pieces under the sword flowers pierced by Helion, flying in the air like a celestial maiden scattered flowers. When all the pieces of fabric fell to the ground, and Doyle disappeared, Helion showed surprise, disappeared. Just for a moment of trance, I only heard a soft humming sound from behind, which turned into a sound of wind, and the humming sound on the sword in the wind became louder and closer. Helion turned his head hastily. He knew that it was too late, but he still wanted to do his best to draw back his sword to resist. At this moment, something unexpected happened again. Doyle, who was behind Helion, suddenly seemed to be hit by something, and suddenly flew into the air for a short distance, and then exploded under a huge red flame. Like bright fireworks blooming in the sky. The sound of the explosion in the air immediately attracted everyone's attention, and even Helion turned around in shock to look at the situation in front of him, only to see that after the violent explosion in the air, a charred black figure fell on the ground amidst the scattered gunpowder smoke. On the ground. Immediately, a transparent figure slowly appeared beside the high platform. He put down his raised right hand, looked at his proud work with both eyes, and smiled grinningly with 2 rows of fangs in his mouth. I'm sorry, I can't help it. Shot, this corpse looks good, can you let me take it back, King Sheila? Franz glanced at Doyle, and said calmly, you can do whatever you want without tension. Absalom laughed loudly. Of course it doesn't matter. This is not what we traded. It can only be regarded as a gift at most. Don't worry, the king's treasury has been opened, and I will send someone to take out the contents. Things have developed to this point, and Franz has put away his joyful attitude at the beginning. If Buggy hadn't made a move and Doyle hadn't appeared, the wedding would have gone on flawlessly, but now it seems. The wedding went in the other direction and became a decoy to seduce the enemy. Kisu. You go to the treasure house and prepare. Franz nodded to Kisu, who returned to his side. Yes. Kisu led a 10-member guard team and walked towards the entrance of the underground passage filled with red mist. After Kisu walked into the bottom passageway, Franz glanced at Doyle, who was lying on the ground, and then stared at Buggy. Actually, I already know about the alliance between you pirates, but Jas and the 2 guys, Tinker, have already been handcuffed by Halushi to lock up their devil fruit abilities, and you 2 are already in danger now. Do you still want to resist? Buggy. I think it's very confusing. You pirates don't everyone know what comfort is. If you can get what you want by serving me honestly, why do you have to do such unnecessary things? Tink and Jas were handcuffed to Halushi. Buggy was a little startled, but he didn't speak, or he was struggling to speak now. At this time, his body was scorched black by the blast, and Doyle, who was seriously injured, finally sat up unsteadily. He picked up the silver cane on the ground, panting continuously. Helen, standing next to Doyle, immediately put on a posture, ready to attack at any time, while Absalom showed a look of surprise on his face. The person who can catch his rocket without dying is definitely a very good body material. Master Moria will definitely be very happy to bring this guy back. Although the situation in front of him was in jeopardy, Doyle didn't seem to notice it, or he was deliberately ignoring it. He raised his eyes and said to Franz, "People's hearts are always greedy. I will be willing to be mediocre, and I will not be willing to be bound in one place for the rest of my life. I think the leader of Buggy should be like me. Before reaching the end of this route, he is destined not to stop. This sea is my waiting for the wild looker's final destination." What a childish set of rhetoric. Franz looked at Doyle, and then smiled. "You talk so much, it's just to delay the time. Let a few little mice in the dark come to my castle to find the key to Lu Shi's handcuffs?" Franz's face showed a look of victory, but it's a pity that the key to this sea tower handcuff is not in the castle. After Franz finished speaking, the ghost general took out a key from his body, waved it casually in front of his eyes, and said to Doyle sullenly, "I brought the Lu Shi handcuffs from the Navy headquarters, and the key is always on me. If you think you have the ability, take this key from me and try it. I want to see what level the pirates with a reward of more than 100 million are." As a vice admiral who once guarded one side, he personally arrested pirates who offered a reward of over 100 million. Have some fun after dinner. The key to the sea tower stone. Doyle's eyes flashed slightly, he clenched the silver cane in his hand, and at a moment when Helion didn't react, he burst out at an extremely fast speed, rushing towards the General Ghost. There was a gloomy smile on General Ghost's face, the 5 fingers of his right hand were spread out, and the wolf claws on his hand were stretched out, and the 5 sharp blades polished by a unique alloy showed a cold light. With a flick of his right hand, the wolf claws and nearly half of the silver blades collided together. Doyle was originally injured and couldn't exert all his strength. He originally wanted to snatch the Lu Shi handcuff key from General Ghost's hand with his explosive speed, but he was still defended by General Ghost. The power of the wolf-claw weapon combined with the arrogance of the armed color made Doyle's mouth go numb, and the silver staff knife almost fell out of his hand. The Ghost General's wolf claws are not like ordinary sharp blades. The 5-handled sharp blades are like a part of his fingers, and they wrap around the silver cane in Doyle's hand with incomparable flexibility, like a poisonous snake that spit out a snake letter in the dark. There is a chilling feeling. Doyle knew that once the Ghost General's wolf claws entangled the silver cane in his hand, he had to abandon the knife and retreat. Otherwise the wolf claws would stab his fragile throat along the cane in the next moment. His gaze was fixed on the key of the handcuffs in the other hand of General Ghost. In a blink of an eye, the cane and scabbard were thrown out, exposing the silver rapier. His right hand holding the hilt swung out sharply. Lang spun around at the fulcrum of Ghost General's wolf claws. At the same time, he did not retreat but advanced. He lowered his body, stretched out 2 fingers, and pinched the key to the handcuffs. General Ghost was also stunned by Doyle's sudden attack for half a second. His attention was focused on the silver sword in his hand at this moment. The moment Doyle's fingers were about to touch the key in his hand, the latter finally responding, the left hand holding the key quickly retracted, and the ribs of the hand hit Doyle. This blow hit Doyle hard on the cheek, and the latter flew upside down like a broken sandbag. The Ghost General grasped the silver-white rapier on the wolf's paw, and suddenly threw it out, stabbing him and flying upside down. On Doyle's left shoulder, it was nailed to the ground like a nail. With his left hand without wolf paws, he wiped the wound on his face that was cut by the silver-white rapier just now, and smiled sinisterly. "It's very clever." Before he finished speaking, the key ring with the Lu Shi key hanging on his left hand was hit by some force, and it flew out of his hand, and the direction of the flying landing was Doyle in front of him. The Ghost General turned his body in an instant, and swiped the 5 wolf claws upwards. Several streams of blood spurted out immediately, and a figure who was about to escape was carried away, and then rolled down on the ground, pure and flawless. The clothes were now covered with dust and blood. The woman who was knocked to the ground with disheveled hair looked very embarrassed. General Ghost cut 5 deep wounds on her chest and abdomen without any distinction of severity, and blood flowed out continuously. And Doyle here has quick eyes and quick hands. Although he didn't know why this woman wanted to help him, he didn't hesitate at all. When the key of Lu Shi's handcuffs was about to fall on him, he instantly lifted his right foot, shook his toes, and used all his strength to move the handcuffs. The key was kicked in a certain direction, shouting, "Catch!" From the bushes in that direction came a few responding figures, caught the Lu Shi key in a panic, and ran away immediately. Franz, who had been following for many years, wanted to chase after him, but was stopped by Franz. He turned around, looked at the fallen woman with complicated eyes, and breathed a sigh of relief with lingering fear. Fortunately, the woman didn't shoot at him. Otherwise the consequences would be disastrous. "You." Franz took a few steps closer, looked at the other party with burning eyes, and a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes from time to time. "Are you also a pirate?" This beautiful woman was accidentally seen before Franz, because she looked so much like his wife Shia, who had passed away for many years, so Franz decided to keep her by his side. But after Kisu sent a text message that the golden pupil had arrived, Franz temporarily changed his mind and decided to marry this woman as his wife and announce it to the whole country. People and gods reversed without knowing it, so that when the king and queen travel together in the future, the people of Wei Lan will not feel a fuss, which is why he will keep a woman whose identity has not been investigated clearly by his side. However, Franz didn't understand where the other party came from, but Buggy just raised his head and caught the scene of the woman's attack. The silk thread in her hand flicked, and it precisely hit the key ring in the ghost general's hand. Flicked the key towards Doyle, and then she wrapped the silk thread in the other hand on the outer wall of the castle. Just as she was about to use the silk thread to lead her body away from the ground, she was hit by the ghost general's claw. The silk thread technique used by this woman is so familiar. She is Lilina. Buggy finally came to his senses. No wonder why he felt that he had seen the other party before. It should be that she used inscrutable makeup techniques to fine-tune her face. Lilina hung her head, propped one hand on the ground, and covered her chest with the other, and suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood. As a very popular Tianwang idol, she often has the opportunity to go out of the island, so she will naturally know a lot about each island. The boat that sailed from Little Chambord came to Willem. She first tried every means to obtain the portrait of Fran's late wife, then made herself into the appearance of Fran's wife Sia and sneaked into the castle to successfully attract Fran's attention, and secretly carried out her own plan. She was also very surprised that Buggy appeared and became the king's son-in-law, but years of acting experience covered her emotions very well, and she pretended to be normal. Until the moment just now, she noticed that General Ghost, the key in his hand, is likely to change the outcome of this battle, so he shot without hesitation. However, she originally thought that she would be able to escape immediately after the shot, but the Ghost General's reaction was beyond her expectations, and she didn't give her a chance, so the situation that was completely opposite to the prediction happened now. General Ghost also walked over at this time, and said sullenly, "Are you going to kill this woman?" Franz pondered for a while. "She is the medium of my contract, let's keep alive first." As they spoke, they waved their hands, and several soldiers drew out their long knives and put them on Lilina's neck. Then Franz turned to look at the situation in front of the palace. Several cadres of the Silver Wing pirates were still resisting, and Captain Doyle reluctantly pulled out the sword nailed to his shoulder, but he was already seriously injured. Buggy not to mention, I can't even walk steadily. Just when Franz was about to speak, there was a sound of laughter in the distance. Groups of guards carrying shields were knocked out, a figure flashed in the sky, and countless black energy particles gushed out from the figure, shooting towards the densely packed soldiers. As soon as these soldiers came into contact with the black energy particles, they immediately felt that the weapons in their hands were very heavy, and their heads began to feel dizzy. The guard circle surrounding the king's castle was suddenly opened by these people, and Jas, Tinker and the surviving subordinates walked in through the breach. Tinker glanced indifferently at the situation in front of him, while Jas had transformed into a crocodile with a cigar in its mouth. "We meet again, Shiro." Franz looked at the two leaders of Tinker in front of him. "You really are a group of irritating pirates, like flies, you can't drive them away. Although you ambushed me, I don't hold grudges against you." Jas laughed nonchalantly. "After all, the winner is the king, and the loser is the bandit. I did lose in the previous contest, but now this contest will not make you so proud. I will smash your face to the ground." Jas the crocodile. General Ghost took 2 steps forward. "It is indeed a little famous little pirate. When I became the vice admiral, I heard this name mentioned by my colleagues, but take this as you're the capital. Isn't it too smug? Vice admiral. Sounds more rampant than the pirates like me." Jas' face became slightly concerned, and he turned to look at Tinker. "Lieutenant General, how are you?" "Okay." Tinker looked back at Jas indifferently, "But don't call me a hedgehog." "Is it 2 people going up together?" Ghost General grinned. "It's just for me to stretch my muscles a little bit, don't worry. I will get rid of you soon." Before he finished speaking, Tinker waved his arm unceremoniously, and countless black particles waved from his arm, shooting towards the Ghost General like dense bullets. The Ghost General's wolfclaw weapon instantly became domineering, and with a quick swipe, it cut off all the black particles that swung towards it and resisted them. Immediately, the sharp wolfclaws in his hands were slightly close together, and his figure turned into an afterimage. He plundered towards Jas and the 2 of them. Tinker and Jas didn't dare to go forward carelessly, and the 3 of them immediately fought into a ball. Although Jas's crocodile scales are very thick and hard, they still can't withstand the Ghost General's wolf claws attached to the arm domineering. Every time he is hit by the opponent, a shallow wound will be left on his scales. For singles, Jas will definitely be at an absolute disadvantage, but with Tinker on the side to contain an attack, this battle becomes suspenseful. Tinker is a night fruit capable user. His attack has 2 states, one is a bullet-like point attack, and the other is an energy attack with sleepiness and fatigue. No matter which one is, the general ghost must separate 1/3 of the psychological defense. However, because Tinker and Jas were cooperating for the first time, there was no tacit understanding between offense and defense at all, and the ghost general found several loopholes in just a moment. Several long and narrow wounds were drawn. Standing on the high platform, Franz watched with flickering eyes the fierce battle between the ghost general and Jas, and the stubborn resistance of several Silver Wing pirates' cadres surrounded by soldiers. After some dealings here, he knew that these two were powerful, much stronger than ordinary pirates, otherwise they would not have occupied the position of the overlord of Shauchambord Island for many years. He didn't know that General Ghost was fighting with the two whether he will win or not, but he doesn't feel uneasy in his heart. What really gives him confidence is the one guards guarding Wei Lan. The guard team has begun to gather after the wedding, and will return to the king's castle from all directions, forming an unbreakable encirclement, whether it is Doyle, Jas, Tinker, or Bucky. Even no matter how powerful these people are, surrounded by a full one guards, there is absolutely no hope of victory. Your Majesty. Something is wrong. Just when Franz felt that he had the chance to win, a guard with a phone bug hurriedly ran to his side, sweating on his forehead and said, "The guards have all been disrupted." Franz stared at the guard in shock. "What are you talking about?" The guard with the phone bug knew the seriousness of the situation, so he didn't dare to speak too loudly. He only whispered in Franz's ear, and then Franz's expression gradually froze. Franz said coldly, "Helion, protect Xiaolu, and come with me to the king's treasury." He solemnly glanced at Bucky and the others in front of him, then walked towards the passage under the stone statue, surrounded by guards in heavy armor to protect the front, preventing the Silver Wing pirates' cadres or Doyle from wait for someone to rush up suddenly. Looking at Franz's expression, Bucky knew that another part of his plan had succeeded. He inquired about the information that Wei Lan had a full guards in his conversation with Qi Qianlu before, and quickly took corresponding measures. Since he came to the king's castle alone, Kabaji, Shuma and the three of Kya joined Doyle under his orders, and they also used the phone bug to communicate and act. After that, these three people were sent out by him to contain the guards. On the day of the wedding, he and Kixilu will board the wedding car and circle around the inner city of Wylan under the watchful eyes of all the people of Wylan. Sneaky people clean up and maintain order at the scene. In order to contain this army, Kabaji and the three alone are not enough, so Bucky did not intend to let the three of them use force to contain it, but focused on all the crowd watching the wedding. Bucky asked the three of them to exchange a large number of Baileys with only 10 denominations and 100 denominations. When the wedding was drawing to a close and the guards were ready to gather the team, they began to act. Toss coins at crowds in the street. Although there are only 10 and 100 denominations, but the huge amount cannot stand, especially after seeing the 10 denomination coins first, and then seeing the 100 denomination coins, the estimated value generated in people's hearts will fully mobilize their enthusiasm. Everyone on the road will also rush to grab these coins, and the original peaceful order will naturally be disrupted. If the 10,000 guards want to return to the king's castle in an orderly manner amidst this chaos, they will probably have to. It is very laborious, because they are not facing the enemy, but ordinary people. Although the plan was successful, Bucky didn't feel any joy in his heart. After all, he was swayed by the other party when he swayed Franz. In his current physical condition, he could only watch as Franz went to the king's treasury. Go, but can't stop. The battle between Ghost General and Jia Si became more and more intense. "Hey, what are you doing, Hedgehog Head?" While punching back at the Ghost General, Jas said unhappily that because of the cooperation between the two, Tinker's attacks would be used by the Ghost General from time to time, and hit Jas instead. "HMPH, don't call me a hedgehog, and you're the one who gets in the way. Yeshu." Tin K snorted coldly, and the black energy cluster in his hand instantly condensed into the shape of 6 or 7 darts, and shot towards General Ghost. The Ghost General, who was pinned down by Jas, flashed when the dart was about to approach him, and 6 or 7 black darts flew towards Jas, who was blocking his vision. The oncoming black dart was already very close, and Jas was forced to quickly cross his arms covered in thick scales in front of him to block the blow. The black dart pierced straight into Jas's arm, immediately piercing several blood holes in his arm, and then the dart turned into dots of black light and disappeared into the air. "What are you trying to do, you bastard hedgehog?" Jas was furious. Tin K, who was standing a little far away, said indifferently, "I didn't think about what to do, you were so stupid." "What did you say?" "I said you were stupid. Damn hedgehog bastard." While the two were yelling at each other, General Ghost rushed towards Jas at an instant speed, because Tinker was fast and not easy to get close to, while Jas had thick scales and high defense, but his movements were relatively sluggish so he locked his target on Jas, who was easy to hit. As long as Jas was defeated, he would be able to use his full strength to deal with Tinker, and let this battle end quickly. Wolf bite. The wolf claws on General Ghost's hand were covered with black-armed domineering arrogance. At this time, they were slightly bent, like a bloody mouth. As they were moving fast, they pierced with a piercing sound that seemed to be able to split the surrounding air. To Jas. Jas frowned, and the oncoming claw attack made him feel a terrible sense of crisis. He quickly lowered his body, put his hands on the ground, and increased his chassis. In an instant, a thick crocodile nearly 2 meters long, the tail turned quickly like a coming storm, whipping towards the Ghost General. Poochie. The Ghost General was much faster and disappeared in place. The wolf claw on his right hand drew 5 phantoms in the air, and then pierced Jas's chest. Hot blood immediately dripped down the sharp blade. Down. With one hit, the Ghost General pulled out his wolf claws swiftly, and stepped back without hesitation, trying to avoid the crocodile tail that Jas attacked, but he still underestimated Jas's full strength, and the crocodile tail flicked wildly. The afterimage flew by, throwing him out heavily. General Ghost flew upside down for a distance of tens of meters, and was caught by more than a dozen guards around him. His cheeks puffed up, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and looked at Jas sullenly. What a terrifying force. The blood on Jas's chest spewed out like a fountain as the Ghost General pulled out his claws. He held the bleeding wound with one hand, and supported the ground with the other hand. His eyes began to blur. Although it was an exchange of attacks, General Ghost's injury was slightly less serious, while Jas's injury was fatal. If it wasn't for the protective effect of his thick scales, his heart would have been pierced right now. General Ghost gave a sinister laugh, and rushed towards Jas again, making the final makeup. Night Tour. Tinker's body was wrapped in a cloud of black mist, and he moved irregularly in an instant. He suddenly appeared in front of Ghost General and kicked him in the stomach. On a thick iron plate. General Ghost was repelled by this force for a few steps. His feet drew a shallow mark on the ground, and he stopped immediately and rushed forward. With only Tinker alone, Ghost General's movements suddenly became more comfortable. In the joint attack between Tinker and Jas just now, although he could use one of them's offensive to leverage his strength, after all, he would be restrained and difficult to perform. True strength, and now although he and Jas exchanged injuries, the injured state is enough to suppress Tinker. The suppression here is really literal. Tinker is too easy to get close in front of the Ghost General, and every time he avoids it dangerously, the timing of launching the black particles also drops sharply. The two over there were fighting fiercely, and a floating bubble suddenly appeared above the sky over here from nowhere. What is that bubble? A group of unidentified soldiers were attracted by a bubble floating from nowhere in the sky. Snapped. The bubbles suspended in the air suddenly burst, and a figure in light yellow clothes landed in the crowd like a flower fairy. Buggy saw it clearly. It was Kia. Since she took the pill made from the fanatic grass, her physique has been strengthened a lot, and the height of 6 or 7 meters is no longer a difficult task for her. As soon as Kia landed, she saw Buggy on the ground and smiled slightly. Uncle Bucky, the mission is completed. Hey, it's the pirate's accomplice. Don't be fooled by her weak appearance. Seeing Kia's actions, the soldiers naturally knew each other's identity, and alerted each other vigilantly. Sure enough, you already have the ability to stand alone. Bucky nodded, looked at the surrounding soldiers, and said in a low voice, "Can your devil fruit ability help me regain my strength?" Uncle Bucky. You. Kia watched Bucky sitting with difficulty, and stopped asking. I see, I will try it. From the very beginning, she rushed here with the determination to do her part, and she also knew the current situation, so she would not have healed Bucky directly in front of the enemy without being foolish. Defense the surface. Kia pressed her left hand on the ground, and a resin bubble appeared from the palm of her hand, spreading out like a stream of water. The bubble spread rapidly, and under Kia's control, a bubble about 2 or 3 times in length and width appeared. Mia's cuboid film cover wrapped her and Bucky inside, and several soldiers who surrounded them took 2 steps back in fright. Hey, what is this? Whatever it is, let's grab this woman. Since Franz ordered Bucky not to be harmed unless necessary, there were not many soldiers around Bucky. There were only about 10 people guarding him. They had a quick exchange. Signaling an attack, the 3 front soldiers picked up the sabers around their waists and slashed down on the film cover. When the saber touched the cuboid bubble, the tip of the knife was wrapped with a film cover, and the white bubble that was extruded spread from the tip of the knife to the entire handle of the knife, and quickly climbed onto the palm of the soldier who issued the knife. As if there was a spirituality, the living creatures spread along the palm, wrist, and arm, and instantly wrapped the soldier into an irregular human-shaped bubble, constantly bouncing and rolling on the ground. The sabers in the hands of the other 2 soldiers also did not break through the membrane cover, and were trapped in the same white bubble. Their trapped bodies seemed to be in a state of weightlessness. The upside-down bomb flew into the air, and then fell to the ground again. Bucky in the hood looked at the situation of the soldiers outside with some surprise, and then looked back at Kia, who kept one hand on the ground. He could see that Kaya should use her hands on the ground to continuously send energy towards the film cover to maintain existence and tension. Once the group of soldiers touched the cover, they would be affected by the bubbles formed by the flowing energy on the surface. Bubbles get stuck. Bucky couldn't help but click his tongue and said, "It's amazing. It seems that you have mastered a new ability." But this defensive bubble can only last for a minute or two. Kia was somewhat happy when she heard Bucky's praise, but she didn't show a complacent look on her face, that said firmly with her eyes, "If I don't work hard to keep up with your footsteps, I will become your burden and burden again. A burden. I don't want to cause you any more trouble." Bucky replied solemnly, "Kia, you have never been a burden. From the moment you board the boat, you have been our companion." Hearing Bucky's words, Kia showed a soft smile. "Okay. Time is running out. First use your ability to help me see if you can get rid of my current state." "Yes." Kaya nodded succinctly. Green sap bubbles emerged from her free right hand, and then pressed into Bucky's chest bit by bit. She was trying to use this force to help Bucky expel particles in the body. "We go together, no matter what strange power she uses. There is no way to deal with so many of us at the same time." The soldiers outside the cover looked at each other, surrounded them again, raised dozens of sabers at the same time, and slashed at the film cover. Fighting on the other side in front of the king's castle. "You can't beat me." General Ghost looked at Tink with a sinister smile. His armed and domineering wolf claws kept hitting Tink, approaching Tinker. A large open space was formed around the battle between the two, and no soldier dared to surround him to die. Tinker keeps retreating. He is a mage level after all, and his physical strength is slightly insufficient. Once the Ghost General gets close to him, his greatest speed advantage is gone, and the cloak on his body is also torn several times by the opponent's wolf claws. The bright red blood flowed outward. Although he can enter the sleepwalking state, but this state consumes a lot of energy. In this battle, he will only use this move when it is absolutely necessary to avoid the opponent's fatal blow. Ghost General has a lot of experience in battles, and suppresses Tink with an absolute advantage in battle, but Tink is a pirate with a high bounty after all, and he also has a set of unique attack methods. The tiredness and sleepiness brought by his night fruit, the power of the ghost, is very difficult to deal with, and the bruise on General Ghost's body that was hit by Jas just now has begun to deepen in the non-stop battle. Dodging, he may not be able to get cheap from Tinker now. Rich combat experience and two-color domineering, this is the capital of Ghost General to be able to stand out from the crowd. Dark Night. Collapse. Tinker was cornered by the Ghost General's fight. He used sleepwalking to move irregularly, and instantly jumped into the air. While leaping, his body began to continuously secrete black mist, covering the sky and covering the sun. The soldiers below were also affected by the power of the night, and they all began to yawn again and again, and their eyelids became heavy. Then all the black mist scattered from Tinker's body condensed back, and with his right hand as the origin, a large black lacquered hand entity with a size of more than 10 meters was formed, and then it moved towards the direction of the Ghost General, and went away with heavy pressure. Facing this behemoth, General Ghost also felt a little uneasiness. With one step, he stepped on the moon step and charged upwards. The wolf claws covered with armed and domineering stood erect on his head, and his body was like a bloodthirsty black wolf galloping upwards to meet this big hand. The bloodthirsty black wolf kept biting in the air, chewing and dispelling the big black hands one by one, but the black mist on Tinker's body continued to replenish the big black hand that was rolling down, making it more dense. The two sides held a fierce stalemate for a few breaths. Tinker's face became paler and he was finally unable to continue, and the Ghost General charged suddenly, like a straight sharp sword, tearing the big black hand into two halves. Just in the blink of an eye, tens of meters of pitch black hands turned into black mist, filled the air, and then disappeared into the air in countless black spots. Scattered black mist surrounded Tinker's body at this time. All his strength was exhausted in this battle, and he entered a short-term unconscious state. At this moment, he kept falling like a bird with its wings broken. Although General Ghost also consumed a lot of physical strength in this confrontation, he was still able to step on the moon and quickly approached Tinker. He had a dark smile on his face, and his right hand with the wolf claws was slightly bent backwards, ready to activate the charge one strike. Tinker could only watch helplessly as the opponent kept approaching and was powerless. For some reason, he was very indifferent to everything. Looking at the sharp five-bladed blade, his heart became hopeless. His resistance and fear of death made his body began to tremble instinctively. He has personally experienced the thickness of the crocodile scales after Jas's transformation. Even shells can hardly leave marks on Jas's body, but he was still pierced through the chest by the Ghost General. Even Jas couldn't stop the Ghost General. Wolf claws, not to mention his body. Goodbye. When he heard General Ghost's gloomy words whispering in his ear, his heart couldn't help beating half a beat slower. He felt that the scythe of death had been lifted around his neck, and in the next moment, it would bring take your own life. Clang. Between life and death, the sound of metal impact brought Tinker, who had closed his eyes and waited for death, back to reality. When he opened his eyes, he saw a figure flashing by, holding the ghost general with a long snow-white knife. The wolf claw that hit it. In the blink of an eye, the man kicked General Ghost in the ribs, and the latter was kicked down like a shooting star, hitting dozens of soldiers who were fighting with the Silver Wing Pirates' cadres. The group of soldiers still didn't act as a buffer, and even the ghost general was smashed to the ground, kicking up countless dust. The figure sheathed the knife, and landed steadily in the opposite direction to General Ghost, with a gloomy face. "Sorry, I'm late." Tinker originally thought that the pirate from Buggy Pirates would catch him by the way after saving him, but the other party had no intention of this at all, so he fell to the ground in a state of free fall. His body was shaking, almost fell to pieces, but lying flat on the ground heaved a sigh of relief. His heart fell like a boulder, and he mumbled, "I'm still alive." On the other side, these soldiers trapped by the bubbles derived from the film cover, because of the unstable center of gravity, couldn't use any strength to pierce the bubbles on their bodies, and at this time they were half floating in the air with their feet upside down. These bubbles seemed to build a bridge in the air. A figure bounced on it, and finally landed randomly on the ground. He rubbed his fingers under his nose, and shouted, "Bucky, my mission is completed." Seeing that Kabaji and Shuma both came, Bucky's tense heart could not help but relax. With these two people, this battle will not be so difficult. Moreover, he felt that his body was slowly recovering under Kaya's treatment, and strength began to emerge from his hands and feet, but even so, it would take a lot of time to continue this treatment, and Franz was already moving towards the king's treasury has gone down. If he does everything he can to destroy the so-called springboard in the air and block this route, then even if he wins this battle, he will still lose in the end. "Kaya, is there any way for me to recover all my strength now?" Bucky turned to look at Kia. Kaya hesitated for a moment and said, "Yes, but it will cause a certain load on the body." "Very good." Bucky nodded, and then seriously shouted to Shuma and Kabaji, "You two go to that underground entrance, and control that guy wearing the crown. Don't hurt him and that fat guy. Princess." Kabaji nodded towards Bucky. Shuma scratched his head. The two of them knocked away the surrounding soldiers, and walked towards the underground passage according to Bucky's instructions. And Bucky looked at Kia. "Use your ability to restore me to my best state now."